The story begins in the snowy north in the Grand Duchy of Blain, the head of the Blain clan. Reca Blain lowered his head in confusion and asked only one question: why? The chicken that the girl was holding in her hands also looked at the head of the clan in bewilderment, not understanding what was wrong. However, the boy could not understand exactly why the daughter of the Netri family came to the north. Before us was our heroine, the daughter of the southern Netri family, Shuer. The girl literally just silently looked at the head of the Blain family for a few minutes, not holding back her smile. Soon, Shuer spoke. She couldn't believe that she had seen the Grand Duke, so she immediately offered him some eggs. The boy, perplexed, asked if roosters lay eggs. The girl laughed and then asked if he wanted some chicken dish. In any case, she still couldn't believe that the Grand Duke was looking at her. Shuer at this point decided to say that the merchants in whose cart she was riding had given her this rooster. After the Duke's silence, our heroine told him that if he didn't like chicken dishes, then perhaps he wanted to hold her hand. Reca sighed and said he didn't understand what she was trying to achieve. Shuer said she wanted his autograph. Handing over a piece of paper, the girl promised that if he signed it, she would make it a family heirloom. However, despite the girl's persistence and kindness, the Duke ordered the guards to take her away. At that very moment, she was grabbed, but Shuer asked to wait a minute because they could not discuss the most important thing. Our heroine escaped from the hands of the guards, after which she sat down on one knee and asked the Duke to marry her. After some time, our heroine was lying in her room, and looking at the ring, she was perplexed. She proposed, and Reca was not even surprised. However, the girl generally guessed that everything could not have gone so easily. This duchy was so terrifying to her that even the guards frightened her. Shuer soon began to think that she would not succeed in this body either, but she still could not lose hope because she had not come this far to give up. Perhaps to begin with, it is worth figuring out who this Grand Duke Reca Blain is. He inherited the ability to use emotions in sword techniques, but eventually lost all feelings due to the increased frequency of monster suppression expeditions. This guy is the second main character of the novel The Lady That Blossoms Flowers. At first, he attracted her attention because she was jealous of him. The action moves into the past. A group of people were discussing an accident that a 20-year-old girl had. The man wanted to help with money, but the woman said that she would do everything herself. However, other people tried to manage our heroine's money. Some asked for a loan, and some tried to tell her about great stocks to invest in. She was always surrounded by people who wanted to take advantage of her. Without emotions, she would not have felt such disappointment. In the end, it all started with envy, but at some point she became his fan. Her life filled with endless disappointments and unfulfilled expectations became brighter. But to her horror, the novel itself ended with the tragic death of the Duke, with whom she had become so moved. Without the main character, he lost all emotions and could no longer use his sword, so he fell along with the entire North. That's how it all ended. However, right now, she could see him alive again, and it made her incredibly happy. Our heroine understood that her new life was a new opportunity, which meant she would save the Duke and see him happy. 2 weeks before arriving north, our heroine was hit by a truck and soon opened her eyes while picking a flower. Just as she was holding the flower in her hand, someone walked up to her and shouted in bewilderment, asking how she could pick flowers so carelessly. Not hearing an answer, the man entered the girl's room and continued shouting. He asked how long she planned to disgrace their family name. Looking at the bewildered Shuer, he told her to know her place and not try to poison Reca anymore. Thus, the man continued to shout and prove her uselessness, while our heroine was only surprised by his words, namely, Shuer. Looking around, she saw the family flag and wondered, could she really be the same Shuer Netri? This girl is the first daughter of the Southern Duchy, and also a minor villain in the novel, The Lady That Blossoms Flowers. The eldest children inherited the ability to manifest the power of bloom through the sword from generation to generation. Only this time it went to the second daughter, Reca Netri. She took everything from the strength to the love of the main character. Shuer, driven by an inferiority complex, wanted to kill the main character, but was executed for trying to harm the future head of the family. Our heroine, perplexed, touched the mirror and asked to tell who was the most unhappy in the world. She had red hair and golden eyes like the main character. By the way, she is even scolded simply for hanging out with flowers. Our heroine did not understand why she was lucky to become her. At that moment, she thought about it. She suddenly realized that if Shure was still alive, then the Grand Duke was not dead either. Our heroine knew that he would be able to live when he got his emotions back, so she also remembered that in the original he had feelings for Irina, which meant she needed to be convinced. At that moment, a female voice was heard in the room asking the father to be less cruel. No matter how you look at it, Shure will not be able to show his strength through the sword. The girl threw down a vase of flowers and told her father that he would waste his energy. The man said that Irina was right, and then asked how the dinner with the imperial family had gone. The novel's main character, Irina Netri, smiled and said that everything went well, and that His Majesty asked her to convey his best wishes to her father. Our heroine was shocked. She understood that the relationship between Shure and the family was not very good, but this, as it seemed to her, was too much. By the way, Irina was holding the flag of the Imperial Knights. Reca would die a year after the flag was hung in the hall. Shure asked herself a logical question. Will she be able to convince Irina in this year? Most likely, Shure's evil deeds have caught up with her, which means there is no chance if even her family treats her terribly. At that moment, the man was telling his daughter that only she could save the reputation of their family, but her older sister was picking flowers. It was at this moment that our heroine realized that she had only one option. She had to break all ties and start all over again. Shure said that because of this she intends to leave this house because she will not be able to show strength anyway. Now they can consider that she as the second daughter simply did not exist. Obviously the man was incredibly shocked by this act, so he told his daughter, who had decided to manipulate again, to stop. Looking at Shure, who stood in front of the closed door, he said that if she took one step beyond the door, she would never be his daughter again. Our heroine, without changing her face at all, just smiled and opened the door and told her father that she agreed he could excommunicate her from the family today. She ran away shortly after. It looks like our heroine will have to return the Duke's feelings before he meets Irina. Shure knew it didn't have to be love, anger, nervousness, irritation, anything would do. Already on the road with her chicken, our heroine was sure that she had to meet the Duke to save him. That's why she was going north. After some time, our heroine was greeted by her personal maid, whose name was Sally. Shure, looking at the girl in bewilderment, asked if the Duke had sent her. The girl explained that he had ordered her to be accompanied, so if she had any wishes, she should contact him. Our heroine was incredibly happy that the Duke was interested in her, so she asked if he had said anything else. Sally smiled and began quoting Regrain's words. Let him send the rooster to the farm if she wasn't going to raise chickens. Even more surprised, the girl asked if he hadn't said anything about an offer or sending her back to the south. Maybe he had said something about her. In turn, Sally only smiled and said that if Lady Shure wanted to return to the south, she would prepare a carriage for her. Our heroine was, of course, very surprised that this was all the information, but perhaps it is better to be glad that she was not immediately driven away. There were two pillars of defense in this country. Two houses of swordmasters. Netri was responsible for the central region. The other was the Blain, who fight together with the monsters in the north. Both families have been feuding for a long time. Blain's swordsmanship is very brutal because they have to fight monsters. Of course, everything that was happening could not help but cause fear and trembling in the people around. Somehow, at some point, even the central region defense management became people who mastered the Blain style. The Netri family saw this as a threat to their existence, and as a result, this conflict has lasted for many generations. And so the Duke gave a room to Shure, but where did he go? Sally suddenly told the lady that she was probably tired from the trip and the punitive detachment had not yet returned. Shure immediately looked at Sally with joy in her eyes and asked if she could see the Duke at least in the evening. If the offer didn't work, then other methods had to be used. She had to meet him to find a way to return his feelings. Remembering his cold eyes, remembering his strict but chic uniform, our heroine wanted to see him more and more. The girl suddenly began to fantasize, saying that it was wonderful to see his lordship in person, and she wanted to draw his portrait right there. Sally smiled and said that it was the first time she had met a person with such thoughts. In any case, she asked if it was true that Shure had traveled all the way north on a cart. Our heroine said that the road was not too difficult. The merchants who gave her a lift were very kind. However, Sally interrupted Lady Shure and asked if she really liked his lordship that much. Our heroine smiled and said that it was true. After all, there are not many people in the world who can charge you with motivation just by existing. While others celebrated their birthdays in the company of family and friends, our heroine spent them alone. Soon, only thoughts of the life of the Grand Duke could help her get back on her feet. At this point, Shure said that she would like to know more about the Duke's daily routine. After a while, the action takes us to another room. The tired captain of the Blain Knights, Jess Bellion, said that Shure Netri was recently excommunicated from his family. The Duke, who looked at the documents, only asked what the reason was. The assistant said that Irina, the youngest daughter, had become the commander of the Knights, which meant that Shure had lost the struggle for power. There were also suspicions that she had used poisons in her poisoning attempts. "Do you need more details?" Regrain replied that he was only interested in why she had come. Jess said it looked suspicious either way. If she had any ulterior motives towards his lordship, then he... However, the Duke interrupted him and asked if he really thought that he could be harmed by a young noblewoman from the south, information about whom was so easy to obtain. The guy replied that he understood that it had been a year since the Duke had lost his emotions, but still the current situation was a little different. He hasn't participated in suppression expeditions for a long time, and the Netri could use this to harm them. However, the Duke continued to write silently, which meant that Jess himself understood that Regrain did not particularly consider all these facts important. The Duke suddenly asked the boy if the punitive group had returned, to which Jess answered his lordship that they had been gone for a week. The man asked who was in charge of this expedition, to which Jess only said one word: Nevid. But he had always been loyal to the Blain family and was not one to disappear without a reason. Regrain said that the guy might be dead. Then the Duke asked Jess if he had taken the protective magic stone with him. The guy just nodded his head. Regrain immediately said that Nevid's death would only create problems for them, which meant that they had to at least find the body, and therefore he would go personally. However, Jess stopped the Duke, saying that it was impossible. He knew of his lordship's outstanding basic skills, but they were nowhere near the strength he displayed with emotions. The guy continued talking about risks, and soon the conversation turned to monsters. Unfortunately, their number was abnormally large, which worried him. Jess, with the same tired look, said that it is necessary to remember all the risks. If the situation remains the same, then according to Blain's rules. At that very moment, several knocks were heard in the room, which made Jess incredibly wary, and in the blink of an eye, his face even changed. The boy immediately took up his blade, telling the uninvited guest that it was customary to introduce yourself when you come. He wanted to know the stranger's name. However, the Duke immediately stopped him, saying that there was no threat coming from there, so it would be better to lower his sword. Of course, a moment later, our heroine looked into the room and asked if she could also object. Soon the girl said in surprise that she probably had no right to vote. The Duke only asked in surprise how she knew where his office was, since he didn't remember saying anything about it. Shure smiled and said that everything was simple. The knights in front of her room helped her. They became friends while discussing the Duke. The man just sighed heavily and said that this was called a breach of duty. Our heroine looked at him in horror and asked if he could repeat it again. The man cleared his throat and asked what the reason for the objection was. Shure immediately began by saying that firstly, she had never heard a response to her proposal. Looking into his eyes, she understood that he had lost his emotions, but was still going to go on an expedition. In exactly the same situation, the Duke died in the novel. Anyway, the girl then said that the second objection was that she hadn't seen him all day. Regrain asked in bewilderment what the connection was. The girl explained that she was just standing there and not bothering anyone when he struck her with his beauty, so he should be held responsible. The Duke's face obviously did not change at all, but in turn Jess was able to describe with his face his thoughts, and the Duke's. Shure nevertheless asked if she could paint his portrait, and at the bottom she would put a stamp and write, "Happy Duke." Regrain asked if that was all she needed. Our heroine shook her head and then asked if she could ask for anything else. Jess immediately told the Duke that he had a strange taste in women and that she should be thrown out. The girl asked in surprise what the unusual taste meant. What if it was love? Regrain assumed that everyone already knew. After this, he began to walk forward. Jess, perplexed, turned to his lordship and asked him to reconsider his opinion about participating in the expedition. Shure knew things were bad. Of course, she had time before his death according to the plot, but Our heroine screamed and asked Reca to show her where the Kira store was, but Jess told his lordship that the weather at the border was very bad. Their glances immediately intersected, but the Duke nevertheless looked at the girl and asked what she wanted. Our heroine asked him again, and the Duke said that he could buy her anything. Schuer happily said that she would tell him her height and shoe size. However, after these words, he still opened the door and told her that she wanted a lot. As soon as he stepped out into the hallway, Schuer chased after him and asked him to answer one more question. She wanted to know what she should call him when they got married. What about just a husband? Or maybe a darling? Another option was a baby. Reca looked at her in confusion and asked if it was that important. Our heroine said without a doubt that it was important because nicknames increase affection. However, she herself did not want to spoil his beautiful name with nicknames. But unfortunately, she had no choice. If he was going to go on the expedition anyway, she had to give him at least some feelings, even irritation. The Duke sighed heavily and said that they would discuss this after his return in a few days. Our heroine immediately asked him what about hugs. Meanwhile, Jess was catching up with them and asking his lordship not to listen to this strange girl. Reca told Schuer to stay at the estate while he was gone, but Jess still found her suspicious. However, she knew that he was not a bad man. It was obvious that he only wanted the best for the Duke. By the way, in the original, when Reca died, Jess was the only one who looked for the Duke's body even in a blizzard. Our heroine, seeing that Jess went with the Duke, decided that everything would be fine. At this time, the captain of the knights told his lordship that Nevid had not yet returned. Then he asked if it was possible to go there if he could not use the sword properly. Reca was confused and asked who told him that he couldn't use the sword. The question caught him off guard. The guy started talking about what he thought. The Duke, however, interrupted him and said that he need not worry about this expedition. Jess, perplexed, asked if he had felt anything. Why? The knight captain asked to tell about these feelings, and then he will help to preserve these emotions. At this moment, the Duke said that it seemed to him that Netri's daughter had gone mad. Jess thought for a moment, and soon said that it was hard for Southerners to be in the north, because they were freezing, and Lady Schuer had acted recklessly. Before leaving, the guy suggested that the Duke was starting to get irritated by the fact that she proposed immediately upon her arrival. The action moves forward a few days. Our heroine looked in the mirror in surprise and, turning to Sally, asked if all the picture frames were here. When she handed it back to her, she said that there were too many flaws. For example, 3 scratches were visible in the light. Our heroine thought that she would draw the Grand Duke when he returned. Putting her hand on the huge frame, the girl suggested using it because it was better than the others. The maid looked at her mistress in bewilderment and said that if she wanted to leave a fingerprint on such a hand, it would look like a small dot. Schuer replied that art is not just a picture but an interpretation. Here will be the finger of the defender of the North. And by the way, who said that there should be only one print? Our heroine said that the Duke promised to listen to all her wishes, which meant that she needed to take advantage of the moment. Soon the girl asked Seely to give her what she asked for. The girl immediately handed over the same clothes that his lordship wears. Our heroine was incredibly grateful to Seely. Then the girl asked the maid's opinion, would the Duke be interested in barter? Seely, surprised, said that she did not know what the lady had in mind, but it was unlikely to work. At that very moment, a loud sound, or rather a signal, echoed in the room. Obviously, this signal marked the Duke's return to the palace. Sally immediately looked out the window, and only after noticing the Duke did she turn to Mrs. Schuer. Our heroine, of course, didn't need to be told twice, so a moment later she was about to run. In any case, before leaving, the girl asked Sally to stay here and she would go herself. However, the maid immediately approached the lady and said that she would go with her. In that case, she said that they should go quickly. After a while, our heroine watched the crowd of people in surprise. Schuer was a little confused about where the Duke was, whom she still could not find with her gaze. At some point, her eyes caught the displeased face of the knight captain, which meant that the Duke was standing next to him. Our heroine was incredibly happy that the Duke returned safe and sound. She was about to run up to him, but at that moment a guy jumped out in front of her and asked in surprise if this was really the lady who saved him. Our heroine did not understand what was happening because she did not remember such a character. However, the guy at that moment introduced himself as Nevid and told the lady that she saved him. He fought with the monster, but it turned out to be stronger and had to swallow him, but he grabbed the magic stone and wanted to take the monster with him. But at that moment, a hand covered his mouth. The Duke asked Nevid to stop making noise. Then he turned to Shuer and said that if she was going to listen to everything he said, there would be no end to it. However, the Duke immediately told the girl that she did not have to go out because he was met by servants, and he promised that he would return soon. Our heroine smiled and said that everything was fine. Reca immediately said that he didn't have any suitable clothes on hand, so he wanted to talk later because it would be disgusting for her to look at the monster's tracks. Our heroine nevertheless handed him the clothes and said that she just happened to have new clothes, which she decided to exchange for the old ones. All the people standing around were shocked as soon as they heard the words spoken by Lady Netri. In any case, the Duke said he did not remember asking her for such a favor. Shuer replied that the clothes had already been purchased and that they were the same as those the Duke was wearing. The man looked at the girl in surprise and asked how she knew what he was wearing. Shuer smiled and said that she had asked around the mansion while he was away. In any case, she was curious to see if the expedition had gone well. The Duke ignored the question and asked what she planned to do with the clothes he was wearing. Jess immediately said that he had warned him. He had chosen a strange woman. The knight captain wanted to say what would be best to do in such a situation, but our heroine smiled and said that she would like to keep these clothes. This answer again took Jess by surprise, so he asked her what she wanted it for. Shuer looked at him in surprise and said that it was for the sake of admiration. Shuer explained to him that she would feel happy if she looked at these clothes. Unfortunately, she can't see the Duke every day, so she will remember when she sees his clothes. Shuer noticed that the Duke frowned. The guy immediately turned around and told the girl to wait for him in the office because they needed to discuss something. Our heroine was incredibly happy because it seemed to her that her plan was gradually working. Already in his office, the girl was thinking about what the Duke could offer her. Did he really want to give her an autograph and a fingerprint? A moment later, he entered the room and Shuer immediately began to greet him and wave. Incidentally, she noticed that he was wearing a vest. After this, the man was about to sit down on the chair, saying that several days had already passed, and Shuer had not changed at all. Our heroine continued to smile as she looked at him, but she knew that she needed to get used to life in the north. She knew that she would eventually get the Duke's signature. Nevertheless, at that moment, he asked in surprise if she was not tired of all this. Shuer replied that she couldn't say everything, but she was definitely good at painting, and so the portrait would turn out great. Reca immediately asked in surprise if she was one of those who digs one well. This is a humorous proverb about a person who is proud of his only talent. However, our heroine took these words as more cute than funny. In any case, she looked at the table and asked what kind of paper it was. Reca looked at her in surprise, saying that earlier he thought she wanted his signature. Immediately she asked if he would give her clothes. She promised not to smell them or lick them. However, he said directly that her behavior made him doubt, but he did not agree to an exchange of clothes. Putting pen to paper, he said that if she wanted his signature, she should put hers. He seemed afraid that she would blackmail him if she got an autograph. Shuer grabbed the handle and asked if this was some kind of contract. Our heroine began to sign, and only at that moment did the Duke say that this was a marriage certificate. To say that Shuer was shocked is an understatement because her face spoke for her. The Duke immediately said that this was an answer to her proposal. Our heroine was still surprised. Was there really going to be a wedding? Why didn't he send her away but marry her? Our heroine decided that she was probably sleeping. In any case, she reached out her hand again because she wanted to ask something. The Duke grabbed her hand and told Lady Netri that it was her bad habit. She could just ask him a question. Shuer asked if she could bear the Duke's name if she married him. Reca thought about it and soon said that she would get the name as soon as they went through all the procedures. In that case, our heroine assumed that then she could become his official fan. The guy, perplexed, asked what that meant. Shuer smiled sincerely and said that she would be able to see his sleeping face. If she wanted to return the Duke's emotions, she had to stick to him. Moreover, the Duke even accepted the proposal of marriage. With her plan, she kills all the birds with one stone. She saw the Duke and will save him, and she will survive. However, at that moment, the Duke pulled his hand away in surprise. Our heroine assumed that he was afraid that she would poison him in his sleep. Shuer immediately said that she didn't mean anything bad. She was sure that he was beautiful even in his dreams, so she wanted to see him. Soon after an awkward pause, the Duke asked the girl to continue to remain like this, as this strange behavior was making him nervous. The girl grabbed her heart and said that she was doing all this from the bottom of her heart. However, the man responded to this by saying that if she wanted something, he would not be against it, and moreover, he was ready to do anything to get his emotions back. Our heroine herself understood that nervousness is also an emotion. The girl proudly said that she would try to get on his nerves. At this point, the man began to take off his glove, indicating that the issue was probably resolved. He then put his fingerprint on it and said that Shuer should not expect anything closer to a relationship than official spouses. Shuer in turn said that she would be happy even if he waved his hand in her direction. Once a week, Reca was glad about this because he was afraid that this marriage would not live up to her expectations. However, our heroine said that it would be enough for her to just look at him from the side. By the way, the Duke had previously been a character for her who existed only in the novel. It was enough for her that he was simply alive. In any case, the girl promised to work hard for the bright future of the Duke and the North, and she would definitely cope with this. The Duke said that it made no sense. Shuer then said she needed to clarify something. Could she really do anything? Without thinking twice, the Duke said that she could do whatever she wanted. In that case, our heroine told him to change his shirt and fountain pen. Reca looked at the girl with the same puzzled face, not even knowing what to say to him. Meanwhile, the action takes us to the street where the knights were training. Our heroine came out at that very moment and said that the Duke had accepted her proposal of marriage. Instantly, all the guys stopped training, and the knight captain was the most shocked of all. Shuer continued to talk about this and said that the Imperial Palace will receive the marriage certificate next week. However, many knights ran to Lady Shuer saying that they congratulated her. They were shocked by what she had done. Many of the knights, however, said that they understood immediately when she was allowed to remain there. Some even took her hand to shake it. At this time, the butler Peasant came running, who had already given up hope that the Duke would find a mate. Also came the head maid Josefina, who thanked Lady Shuer. Our heroine smiled, however, and said that everything had worked out only thanks to their help. It seemed that their idea of marriage with the Duke was different from reality. At that moment, Nevid approached the girl and asked if it was reasonable to call her the Grand Duchess. Now Shuer laughed and said that he could keep the title. However, behind the knights, there was a blow from a sword, and soon words indicating that the marriage registration had not been completed. Apparently, the bewildered one was Jess, who told the knights to stop chatting and focus on training. Then he looked at Lady Shuer and said that she had better go inside so as not to disturb the knights' activities. Shuer asked if the Grand Duke was not coming today. The girl said that according to rumors, the Duke looks cool with a sword and she wanted to see it. Jess said that although he would arrive soon, his lordship would not personally engage in it. Shuer asked in confusion if he wouldn't even do a few swings. The guy sighed and said that the Duke didn't need basic training. In any case, he decided to warn the girl so that no incidents would occur. The Duke was so strong that he could win even without a sword. He was the only person who did not make a single unnecessary movement. Shuer decided that this was amazing. If even Jess praised him, then the Duke's skills were amazing. The guy became even more gloomy and said that everything was right. That's why he asked the girl to go inside. Shuer asked if she could refuse. Jess even started screaming, saying that everyone was worried about her so they couldn't concentrate on training. Shuer asked to consider her a weed, a big weed. However, at that moment, a tall shadow hung over our heroine, as well as words saying that it would be difficult for a southerner to withstand the cold of the north. Of course, these words were spoken by the Duke, who asked the girl why she was on the training ground. Peasant bowed and greeted his lordship. Our heroine was also incredibly happy to see the Grand Duke. The girl said she was warm. Reca said it wasn't strange because she was wearing the cape he wears on expeditions. Where did she get it? Our heroine said that she asked Saley to bring it, and she did. In exchange, Shuer left a new pen on the table. The guy sighed heavily, saying that he thought whose box it was in his office, and oddly enough, it was from Lady Shuer. However, as expected, he doesn't care about her actions. Filling that emotional hole will be difficult. In the original, he immediately sought out Irina when he realized his feelings for her. At this point, Reca said that Shuer had come here to see him swing his sword. He didn't expect anything else from a family of swordsmen. However, our heroine simply smiled because earlier she had the opportunity to go outside to watch fencing. Soon, the man said that if she wanted to see it, she should guard the cloak but not take it. Shuer said that she was only interested in the things he had been wearing for a long time. Reca was surprised by her high standards. In any case, he asked the knights to come forward if they wanted to spar. Apparently, Nevid was the first to ask. Nevertheless, the Duke took the sword and challenged the captain of the knights to battle. Jess stood in front of his lordship and said that it was a great honor for him. Nevid asked what about him. At this moment, our heroine screamed in bewilderment and asked why Sir Jess had a real sword and the Duke had a wooden one. The guy instantly waved his wooden blade and said that she would now see everything for herself. In that moment, everything became real. The art of fencing, which was created to fight monsters, not people. Watching this battle, it only seemed to her that the only goal was to cut the opponent in half. In the original, by the way, it was said that he loses emotions when he uses a sword. Our heroine clutched her dress tighter and tighter, realizing that everything was becoming a blank slate. She felt for the beautiful landscapes, the people, and everything else. By the way, Blain's sword can be called an example. It doesn't care about morals, principles, or time impulses, only how well a particular person meets the high standards of swordsmanship. Obviously, if the head of the Blain family cannot set these standards, then the skills of his subordinates may be questioned. Perhaps people are afraid of his unspeakable power. In the novel, there was a brief mention of the Blain family harshly training their heirs for generations. By the way, our heroine searched the entire palace while the Duke was away but found no traces of other members of the direct line of the Blain family. Shuer understood that there was no one to replace him, so he tried to bring back the emotions at any cost. In 1 year, the abnormal increase in the number of monsters will wipe out almost all the punitive forces of the North. Duke Reca will certainly be among the victims. Our heroine felt uncomfortable seeing this in real life because then the rest could become reality. In any case, she decided that now was not the time for negative thoughts. She had to figure out how to help the Duke. In the original, for example, it was mentioned that Shuer Netri has the power of healing. When Shuer was executed, the pierced place was filled with flowers which showed her strength. She could use power without the sword, but this only became clear after her death. In any case, looking at her hands, she tried to understand how healing could be connected with flowers. There had to be some hint in the novel. At that very moment, the girl remembered how she had picked flowers at the very beginning. What if Shuer had not picked flowers to spite Duke Netri? At that moment, the Duke approached her puzzled and asked if she had lied when she said she wanted to see him. She herself had asked to show her fencing. However, looking at her, he couldn't understand why her eyes were moist from the sight of a simple training session. Our heroine looked around and noticed that Jess was already defeated. How did they finish so quickly? Shuer immediately said that she was not lying, but was just worried. In this case, Reca told her that she should not have watched the training at all. Our heroine smiled and told him that love was sometimes fragile. She was afraid that the wind might blow it away. The Duke stood his ground, saying that the North was a dangerous place. He would have to wield a sword a lot in the future, and it would be problematic if she reacted like that every time. The girl said that she was thinking about how to make his feelings appear even when it was necessary to use the sword. Will he listen to her? Reca replied that he had no choice. At that moment, our heroine told him that every time he needed to take the sword, he needed to bring her a bouquet of flowers. Sometime later, when the Duke was sitting in his office and signing documents, he turned to Jess and asked him to find a bouquet of flowers. The knight captain looked at the Duke in confusion and asked why he needed him. Reca replied that it was Lady Netri's request. The guy asked again in confusion. The Duke answered that she asked him to bring her a bouquet when he was going to take the sword, so he had to find it today. Jess asked how she could ask for such a thing, although she saw that there was not a single flower in the estate garden. The guy explained that in the southern regions, flowers grow all year round, but where would they come from in the north? For a fresh bouquet, you'll have to go to the east. The Duke said that he had decided to listen to all her wishes, so there was no point in complaining just finding a bouquet. Jess asked if the Duke was sure that she could return his feelings. Reca knew he hadn't felt any emotion in a long time. One thing was for sure now. This weird girl takes things and gives others in return. She asks to see a workout that doesn't interest her and it irritates him. How many more times will he have to corner himself to feel anything? Fear, excitement, incentive. He gets used to everything and loses sensitivity. Meanwhile, the number of monsters in the north has suddenly increased. Any changes are important for the use of his sword. At this point, the Duke only said that the girl had promised to try for him, and what's more, he felt that she was irritating him with all her might. Meanwhile, the action moves to our heroine, who turned to Sally. The girl happily asked if she had received anything, but the maid replied that she had received nothing at all. She realized that it was probably too difficult to find flowers in the north in one day. Was the land really that barren? Maybe growing them would change things. The maid, looking at the mistress, said that it would be better to ask for something else. This winter was especially harsh. Even the punitive troops had a hard time. However, only flowers will suit our heroine. Netri's power is the blooming energy of the sword, which is passed on to only one person per generation. In this generation, by the way, Irina blossomed with poisonous lantana and the Duke's power faded. Then why did flowers appear after Shuer's death? She didn't know how two people could blossom in one generation, but she needed flowers to speed up the process of unlocking her power. If the key to this is growing flowers, then it would be better to deviate from the original to awaken the forces earlier. At this moment, there was a knock on the door. Lady Shuer was told that his lordship was looking for her. Our heroine's face instantly changed. She was glad that he had come. The girl, with the same smile, ran to the door and opened it to meet the Duke. On this side of the door stood the Duke with his coolness, but still holding a branch of camellia in his hand. The girl happily took the branch and asked if it had been cut from outside. Reca said it had been cut from a tree in the greenhouse of a marquis in the east. Shuer hoped that there would be a flower that could be grown indoors, at least. In any case, the Duke said that it was difficult to find a bouquet in a day, so next time he would prepare. Our heroine happily asked him if he had really found it himself, to which the man replied that Jez had noticed the flower when they were returning north. However, if she didn't like it, he asked to give it back. They would find a normal bouquet in the west or east. Our heroine got the flowers anyway, so everything was fine. Then she asked if the Duke had cut them himself. The man nodded his head. In that case, the girl smiled happily and said that she couldn't help but like this thread. The man immediately sighed, saying that the problem was solved. He left the room and our heroine asked him to wait. The girl asked the Duke if she could use the estate's garden. Reca told her that she had become its mistress, so she could do whatever she wanted. Our heroine was incredibly happy about this. Instead of just admiring the bouquets, she will grow them herself. The girl immediately turned to Sally. The maid asked if she needed to bring an album. Shuer nodded and said that she needed a thick album in a hard cover. After this, the girl also asked to bring her a small vase because she was going to save the flowers. After some time, she had a book, a vase and flowers on her table given to her by the Duke. Sally asked in surprise if the lady had really asked for a bouquet to grow plants. Our heroine told her that this was done in order to grow some of them. At that very moment, you could see with your own eyes that the flowers that had just withered came to life before your eyes. However, that was not all. Our heroine now also saw a faint glow from the flowers. The maid laughed and said that if they were that bright, they could even replace a candle. Our heroine realized that the Shuer from the original was not trying to spite Duke Netri. She was only saving the flowers that were dying. She discovered a new ability. However, it turned out that the effect was short-lived. Is Shuer not already very good at this? Netri's power is capable of creating something out of nothing, while hers. In any case, the girl asked Sally to give her a hand. The girl began to squeeze the maid's hand tightly, trying to put a lot of her energy into it. A moment later, she happily asked the maid what she felt, and Sally only said that her grip was weak. Shuer asked if there was anything else. The girl thought for a moment, and then said that her hands were also warm. In the end, nothing happens without flowers. Perhaps healing does not work on people. Our heroine hoped that if she kept trying, she could create flowers like Shuer in the original. At that moment, Sally said that she now understood why the Netri family was blooming. The maid was about to bring another vase for the flower, but Shuer took the flower in her hands and said that they would plant it in the ground. The girl immediately said that if we are talking about the garden, it has not been looked after for a long time. The ground was so frozen that natural flowering was almost impossible. Our heroine was not going to despair anyway, so she said she would try. First, she would have to plow the soil. Seely asked in surprise, who would do it? Shuer stood up and said that she would take care of it and that Saley should prepare the seeds and gardening tools. However, at that very moment, the maid grabbed the girl by the shoulder and reminded her that it was already getting dark, so it was time to get ready for bed and they would do that tomorrow. The very next morning, Jess was standing in our heroine's room and he wasn't particularly eager to be there. Our heroine, who was doing her morning routine with Saley, told the night captain that he had lost a lot of weight since their last meeting. The boy, puzzled, said that he had been climbing the mountains to find flowers. There would also be a meeting that afternoon, and his lordship wanted them to be present together. Shuer jumped up and said that it was excellent. The maid asked the lady not to move because these cucumbers had only been delivered yesterday. However, the girl reminded that the marriage had not yet been registered. Could she participate? The guy said that the day of the trip to the capital had been postponed, so an exception was made. Our heroine immediately pointed to the flowers and asked if it was possible to put a vase on the table in the assembly hall. Jess looked at her in bewilderment and said that he wanted to know first what this nightmare was. Shuer replied that they were flowers given to her by the Duke, sighed heavily and said that up close they were still quite beautiful, so he would put them up anyway. The guy left the room and our heroine asked Saley if she had started preparing because she knew about the meeting. The girl replied that it was happening at about the same time. Our heroine asked what they were discussing there, to which the maid replied that it was a meeting at which heads of families from all over the region gather. Of course, the majority of monsters attack from the north, but there are some that wander around the territories, and this is what is being discussed. The girl also said that it was better for the lady to leave a good impression, especially on the owner of the magic tower. Our heroine asked in surprise why. Saley replied that they were sending mages who were needed for expeditions. If the marriage had been concluded earlier, she might have felt more confident. The last thing the maid said was that Mrs. Shuer should make sure that she looked the strongest. After a while, she was sitting in the Duke's room. The man asked in surprise if she had nothing better to do. Shuer told him that she was working hard right now. Reca asked if looking at him was really work. The girl laughed and nodded her head. Then she asked him if he liked the pen she gave him. Reca replied to her that unfortunately the length of the handle was not very suitable for him. However, the girl replied that she would not take it back and also said that she had ordered a chest of drawers. It would be unpleasant if the Duke's things were covered in dust. The man asked why he would buy something he wouldn't use. However, our heroine reminded him that it was time to go to the meeting. The Duke extended his hand to our heroine and invited her to go to the assembly hall. Shuer took the Duke's hand and instantly lost her mind. It was the Duke's hand. The Duke, sighing heavily, told her that he would not accompany her if she behaved like that. However, our heroine was glad that they were holding hands. She wished that this moment could last longer. Our heroine looked at Reca and asked if he wanted to walk around the mansion before the meeting. The man immediately told her that her intentions were too obvious. In that case, she asked him to pretend he was fooled. The man still said they would go to a meeting first. Sighing, Shuer said she hadn't expected him to agree. At that moment, Patton approached his lordship and said that Mr. Relda had arrived. The man nodded his head and thanked him for the information. Then the butler turned to Lady Shuer about the gardening tools. They had everything ready yesterday. Our heroine smiled at him and thanked him. In any case, she would look at everything after the meeting. Patton nodded and said that he and Saley would be waiting. The girl immediately turned to the Duke and said that there weren't many gardening tools on the estate, so she bought some. She also said that yesterday she had put his flowers in a vase and Jess promised to take them to the assembly hall. She would have to look at them. The knights greeted them at that moment. Immediately, one of them spoke to Lady Shuer about the fence she had asked for. They had been working on it between classes, but it should be nearly ready. The girl was surprised that it happened so quickly. She asked Lotris and Mater to convey her gratitude to the other knights. Then Lotris said goodbye and wished them luck. Our heroine immediately explained that these were the knights who guarded her room when she arrived. She thought that it would be difficult to put up a fence herself, and they decided to help. Soon the girl asked to call them by name when they met. They respect the Duke and will be glad. The man said in surprise that it looked as if she had more to do than he did. Our heroine nevertheless asked not to compare him and her. He is busy with a lot of things. At that very moment, Nevid also came up to them. The guy said he wanted to meet them too, and then said the fence was great. Sure asked if he had been busy training all the time. The guy started telling all their actions about choosing a design and working in detail. Our heroine was perplexed and said that they were amazing. Reca looked like he was on the edge. After some time, they finally reached the assembly hall. The Duke pointed to the girl and introduced her, saying that she was the future Grand Duchess. The master of the magic tower, Relda, in bewilderment, said that if she were abandoned in the northern mountains, she would not last a day. Is this really a bad joke? The guy immediately asked in bewilderment if it was all because of the Marquis, who was always chattering about the wedding. The Duke thought about it and then said that it was possible. Sure realized that this was the master of the magic tower. By the way, all the magicians of the continent obey the magic tower. In turn, only the master is able to provide mages. In other words, Relda helps in finding and killing monsters, gives magic stones for expeditions to the north. This guy is definitely a 5-star guy. He's a key figure for the duchy's long-term plans. The guy at that moment told the Duke that he probably kidnapped a child who knows nothing about this world, and what will he do now? She looks very weak. At first glance, this guy seems young, but his real age is impossible to know. The girl holding Jess by the coat thought that now it was clear why Saley asked to look strong. The captain of the knights at that moment asked to let go of him. With a heavy sigh, our heroine removed her hand, but the guy was so pale that it seemed to her that she would stand out against his background. Just at this moment, the Duke decided to calm Relda down and said that it was a marriage by mutual consent. Our heroine was incredibly happy to hear words of support, and also that he wanted this too. Relda suggested that this was probably why the garden looked like mice had dug it up. The Duke asked him since when he had been interested in the affairs of his estate and when he had started walking in the garden. The boy grabbed his head in bewilderment and replied that he went there only because the garden smelled of magic. Reca asked him to just send more mage groups, as these weren't enough. Relda asked if he knew how much the stones and mages he was getting were costing. Relda was angry because the Duke didn't even thank him for it. The Marquis Chatron Hyenner intervened in their conversation, saying that his lordship had lost his emotions, so all this was expected. Baron Artersizen then intervened and said that even the fact that they personally took part in the last expedition was a huge step forward. Anyway, the man looked at the vase and asked in surprise what it was doing in the assembly hall. Our heroine smiled and said that she had put the flowers that the Grand Duke had given her. Beautiful, weren't they? The Baron replied that he had heard that he had cut a branch from a tree that the Marquis was growing. The man then asked if he understood correctly that the lady was from the Southern Netri clan. Our heroine nodded her head. The man immediately decided that if they got married, the two leading families of swordsmen would meet in one generation. The man also said that in the Netri family, the eldest child is appointed heir, so it seems that the punitive forces of the north may receive support. The Marquis, knowing more information, asked the Baron to stop being so polite. Shure also decided to interrupt him and said that she had been excommunicated from the family. The man turned pale at that moment. He asked in surprise if she was the second daughter. The girl replied that she was not, but that she was more interested in the Duke than in the sword. She also said that there are no strict laws stating that the eldest child should inherit the family. In any case, she is glad that she came to the north because she can communicate with the Duke. It will also be better if they do not call her by her old name. The girl said that she thought the name would be quite enough without formalities. At that moment, the Duke addressed her by name. Our heroine fell silent at this point and then asked in bewilderment what he had said. The Duke replied in surprise that he had called her by name. Shure still thought she had misheard him and that he had said something else. Reca asked her to stop pretending she hadn't heard anything. After this, the Duke turned to Baron Artersizen. He said that this marriage would not be a union of families. The Netri would not help with expeditions, so blind hopes should be abandoned. The man in this case did not understand why he would marry the daughter of a family with whom he had bad relations. The Baron began to apologize, saying that it was the first time he had seen a lady from such a prestigious family. Our heroine interrupted him and said that it was okay, because she also knew little about the North. The Baron certainly had no bad intentions, and thanks to him, the Duke called her by name. Chetron at this point reminded that the Duke had not participated in expeditions for about a year. During this time, the Northwest was flooded with various monsters. However, it was the same in the Northeast. They would soon sweep away the entire continent. Damn monsters! Relda said that their numbers had increased during the Duke's vacation. The Marquis suggested listening to the central government's opinion on the sudden increase in monsters, but Relda said that they were too proud to discuss anything. Our heroine couldn't even imagine that the situation was so serious, although even in the original, the main characters realized the danger only after the invasion of monsters. The Marquis still said that it was also difficult for the Duke to go on expeditions often, so he should at least try to establish some connections. Schuer replied that it had been 100 years since the central government had handed over the affairs of the North into their hands. Even if they send help, those people won't know any more about the North than the Duke. Relda said it was true, they'll just pretend it wasn't their fault. However, the boy asked in surprise why she was speaking on behalf of the North. Schuer laughed and said that Netri was only involved in the affairs of the center, and she understood this better than anyone. Their support will not help much, so you need to think about something else. The Duke and Irina cannot meet. Regrain experienced emotions when he saw her and believed that it was love. However, everything was not as the Duke wanted because Irina chose another protagonist. The Duke lost the rest of his feelings forever. It is logical that if the center interferes in the affairs of the North, Irina will come because she is the commander of the Knights. Since their meeting is inevitable, it is necessary to return the Duke's emotions to her. At that moment, the Duke said he was going to do something he had been putting off for a long time. Schuer hoped he was not talking about an expedition. The man asked her not to worry, because this time the bouquets would be ready. Moreover, Jess said that they had already delivered them. Relda asked in confusion if he really wanted to get rid of a year of monster accumulation per approach. The Duke said that the schedule would shift. Regrain added that it wouldn't matter if the marriage registration had to be postponed, but at that moment Relda laughed and said that the man next to him didn't think so. The Duke instantly turned his head and noticed Schuer in front of him, holding on with all her might. Regrain sighed heavily, understanding what the girl's gaze was now about. Relda tilted his head in surprise and said that it was the first time he saw the Duke so exhausted. By the way, he still felt a strange energy from the garden. Schuer asked if he was tired, but the Duke told her that he was fine. At this point, Relda decided to say his final words. When this expedition is finished, he will look after the North and allow them to go to the center. Then the guy said that he himself was tired of constantly hanging around in the tower. Then he asked if this arrangement suited Lady Schuer. Our heroine immediately understood that the Duke would be able to take a break from expeditions and the magician would take care of the North and deal with monsters. She happily said that she agreed because they say he is good at magic, but she was not warned that he also has a big heart. The guy laughed and said that she chatters much better than the Duke. The girl asked how much time they would have anyway, to which the guy said that he was giving them a week. However, it was not enough. Schuer reminded him that he felt magic in the garden, so there was little time to relax and figure it out. Our heroine, looking into Relda's eyes, said that she was going to grow even more plants. The guy sighed heavily and said he would agree to 2 weeks, but the girl laughed and said 3. The guy was puzzled and said that this was too petty, so he gave them 4 weeks. Schuer was incredibly happy, so she thanked them. In that case, the Duke suggested ending this meeting and going about his business. After a while, the action takes us to the garden where our heroine was checking the fence. Although it was beautiful, it was not known whether it would hold up. Saley replied that Sir Nevid made it so it must be strong. Our heroine also remembered that they had discussed it with him before the meeting. At this moment, a male voice addressed our heroine, asking in surprise if the meeting had already ended. Of course, these guys turned out to be knights who were carrying gardening tools and asking how she was doing with the fence. Schuer happily said that she would have been satisfied with a simple one, but it turned out even better than she imagined. The knights smiled and said that it was not difficult for them. By the way, they brought all the things she asked for, as well as, of course, the Duke's wooden sword from the sparring with Jez. Our heroine asked if this was really the same one, to which Lotris told her that he took it right after the battle, so it was true. After that, the girl turned to the maid and asked when the furniture would arrive. The girl said that handicrafts take a long time. Should she ask for it to be done faster? Shuer said it was all good because her so-called loot would be stored there, so everything had to be done carefully. The knights at this point said that they were done with the fence. Was there anything else needed? The girl looked and said that this place was too wide for Camellia. It needed to be shortened by 2 steps. The boys asked in surprise if she had really planted the branch that his lordship had given her. The girl smiled and said that it was his first gift that needed to be preserved. Our heroine at this point asked to tell about how the Duke went on expeditions, so once he saw how the Duke cut a monster in half, which was the size of a house. While the boys were chatting outside, the action takes us to the Duke's room, where he was busy with work, and Relda was lying on the sofa. At that moment, the guy said that Shuer had a pretty good character. It was clear at a glance that she was the daughter of a knight family. Reca said he didn't know whether it was good or bad, but Lady Shuer was not shy about anything. Anyway, the guy got up from the couch in surprise and said that the Duke had ended today's meeting so early, and that was strange. The man said that there was nothing else to talk about. Relda sighed and asked what would happen to the expedition. Reca told him that they were preparing for tomorrow morning. Soon after, the Duke decided to ask the magician why he did not leave but sat in his office. The guy asked in surprise why he would leave at all. He would have to come back anyway when they went downtown, so he was just waiting for him to return with Lady Shuer. The man said that it was unlike him, as he usually didn't like leaving the tower. Relda replied that the monthly meetings irritated him. In that case, the Duke thanked him for being present this time. The boy replied that he had made an exception because of the garden. The Duke said in surprise that there was no black energy there. Relda sighed heavily and replied that he was not interested in only her, although in the Duke's case, everything is exactly like that. Anyway, soon after the awkward pause, Relda looked at his lordship, making it clear that he wanted something. The Duke, puzzled, said that he didn't know what reaction Relda was looking for, but it was best to speak frankly. He didn't understand what they wanted from him and simply found everything strange. Relda said it didn't look like his emotions had returned, but then why would he send him away? Reca replied that he would have done the same even with emotions. The boy snapped his finger in surprise and asked if it was true. Well, in that case, he would go to Lady Shuer. The Duke was more suited to dealing with disgusting monsters. The guy started creating a portal while all the papers were flying in different directions. Relda said at the end that he would play together with Shuer. The Duke, however, reminded him in bewilderment that he had told the mage to get out of here. Relda smiled and said that he had refused. A moment later, he disappeared from the room, leaving only a pile of papers in ruins. The Duke shook his head and sighed heavily. At this point, Celie was perplexed and told the lady that the fence had fallen. By the way, it seems that flowers from his lordship were in her room. Shaking her hands, our heroine turned towards the maid and wanted to say that in that case they would go there, but she noticed the magician in front of her. Our heroine froze in bewilderment because she did not expect to see the master of the magic tower here. The guy asked her in surprise why she froze. Was she seeing magic for the first time? Shuer told him that there weren't that many mages in the center. The guy said anyway that he felt a strange magical energy from here. Looking at the flower growing in the soil, he said that this was probably the reason, and it was still very strange because even though he felt that the flow was weak, he definitely felt magic. Our heroine was still perplexed by the fact that he had already come to the garden. Wasn't that too strange? In any case, the girl smiled and told him that she was only doing the fencing. Moreover, she said that he could examine anything except this place. Relda was surprised because it seemed like there was something else here. Shuer also said that she heard that there were many magic stones in the tower. Is that true? The guy told her that it was true. They were in his way, so he shoved them into all the corners. Shuer then asked if he had stones that controlled the temperature. The guy said he had them, but why did she need them? The girl said she was going to grow flowers. Even the Duke had a hard time getting her a bouquet. Relda was surprised that he gave her a bouquet. Quite unusual behavior for him, but still Shuer at this point said that she could use the stones when she was tending the garden. Obviously, the master of the magic tower would not help just like that, so the first thing he asked was what he would get in return. He guessed that the Duke's family did not know the value of magic stones. Temperature control stones were considered rare. The girl herself knew that not everyone can make a magic stone. The number of stones that can contain magical power is limited. There are even fewer people who are able to endow stones with this power, but this does not apply to the master of the magic tower. The girl immediately said that netri flowers are quite famous. The man said that he knows that they give black energy. That's why Shuer smiled and said she would give them to him. The guy asked if she was really trying to trick him. He may look young, but he's not. The girl said that she completely understands that he does not believe her. She was even excommunicated from her family, but just look at this camellia. She pointed to the bush and said that she planted it with her own hands, and as a result it takes root and puts down roots in the northern land. The boy, however, said that he was sure that she had not inherited the power of the Netri family. Shuer asked him not to play dumb. She herself reminded him that he said that he felt magical power. This camellia even glows at night. The guy pointed his finger at this small branch in bewilderment and asked if this was what they were talking about now. Shuer nodded her head and then said that he could ask Seely if he didn't believe her. After thinking for a bit, the guy finally agreed to her offer to give him magic stones in exchange for flowers. Our heroine said that she was incredibly happy because without magic stones it would be difficult for the flowers to grow, so she would give him as many flowers as he wanted. She was afraid to lose the first gift from the Duke, so she appreciates his help. Shuer was really happy about it. She has strength, but camellia might not survive the local cold. The guy, perplexed, snatched his hand away, and our heroine said that the Duke had given her this branch, so he asked her to be careful with it as if it were a child. Anyway, the girl said that he could look around the place as much as he wanted, but she had other things to do, so she would go. Soon the girl ran away, and the guy, perplexed, said that any conversations with her began and ended with the Duke. Looking at her, it seemed to him that her affection for Reca was overflowing. One way or another, he wondered, could these feelings be called love? Then he looked at the flower, remembering the words about her being more interested in the flowers than the sword in her hands. The guy still decided to go home, but he realized that curiosity had awakened in him. At this point, the action moves to the palace. Patton wanted to say something to Lady Shuer, but she rushed past him like a train. The girl apologized and said she was busy. As she walked towards her room, she thought about the flowers already in her room. The Duke had said he would send them all at once, so there must be more than one bouquet. Our heroine ran up to Jess and asked what he was doing there, to which the guy replied that she should follow him. After a while, the action takes us into the room. Opening the door, our heroine's face changed to shock. In the middle of the room stood the Duke, surrounded by a whole bunch of different flowers. The man turned his head towards Shuer and told her that she was late. Our heroine, however, still could not come to her senses and could not even put two words together. Reca said that he had not expected Relda to agree to look after the north, so he ordered all the flowers that could be prepared. Our heroine asked in surprise if so many flowers were really needed. The Duke answered that the sword would be useful to him more than once during the expedition. The girl immediately realized with horror that it would take him just such a huge amount of emotions to go on one trip. In any case, without changing her expression, she decided to ask how long his lordship would be gone. The man replied that he had expected it to take a month, but with Relda's help they could do it in a week. Shuer asked if it was about black energy. The Duke told her anyway that she had helped him a lot. The girl was glad to hear this, but in that case asked him to take a step to the left. Reca asked why, and Shuer answered that he would understand as soon as he did it. She asked him to take the flower and turn it to 9 o'clock. Holding the flower in his hands, the man asked in bewilderment if she had really asked to bring bouquets for this reason. Our heroine in turn said with delight that she saw with her own eyes the perfect combination of black and red. Anyway, at that moment, she also said that Relda would give her the temperature control stones, and now the garden would be filled with the Duke's flowers. The man looked at her in bewilderment and asked how he had agreed so easily. The girl happily said that it was so. At that moment, a portal began to open behind her. A moment later, someone fell out of it, which really scared our heroine. Turning her head, she noticed Relda in front of her, who was lying in a pile of flowers, and asked in confusion what it was. Our heroine looked at him in bewilderment and said that he fell on her favorite flowers. The girl fell to the ground and started saying that these were the flowers that the Duke had given her. Relda was puzzled and said that he had actually hit himself. Were the flowers really more important than him? Shuer said obviously yes, because it was her gift. She even prepared an album for the bouquet wrappers. The master of the magic tower was surprised that the man who invested in magic stones ended up collecting simple paper. Our heroine told him that she was paying for the stones for the same flowers. This was not an investment but a purchase. The girl asked him to return the paper to its original state. Then she raised her head and asked why he came here at all. The guy replied that he came to get camellia flowers from the assembly hall, of course. Our heroine, with an even crazier smile, asked if he really came here just for this. Relda nevertheless shouted, and pointing at the Duke asked if she really meant to say that the paper from this scoundrel was better than from him. Reca sighed heavily and asked him to stop before the situation got any worse. The Duke handed Lady Schuer his handkerchief. The first thing the girl asked was how often he used it. The man nodded his head. Seeing the girl's admiring eyes, he immediately asked if she wanted to take him away. The girl smiled and asked if he wanted to trade for the paper. He sighed heavily and told her she could have it all. Meanwhile, Relda, still lying on the flowers, said that it was so absurd that it was impossible to even look at it. In any case, the action is postponed for some time. That night, the Duke stood in the street and looked at the still-awake palace. The captain of the knights approached his lordship and said that preparations for the expedition were complete. They had not organized a campaign of such a scale for a long time. Will everything be all right? However, at that moment, Reca thought about how Lady Netri had been stalking him all day. Realizing that she was not around now, he assumed that she had already calmed down, which could not but please. Jess said that fortunately the same thing happened to Relda. Even though he speaks bluntly, he still worries about the Duke. However, the man said he didn't think so. He also suddenly wondered if gardening was always so noisy. Looking at the flower he gave her, Reca realized that nothing had been peaceful since the day he met Schuer. She is always in his sight, and what's most terrible is that she is always even in his thoughts. In any case, he decided to leave it that way. No one knew where she would freeze to death if she disappeared. Wait, was that really resignation? The Duke at that moment turned around and said that he was used to all this. Jess said that it would be strange not to get used to it having known Relda for so long. At that moment, the Duke began to climb the stairs, and the knights said that they were only waiting for his order. May order and balance come to the north. Suddenly, the man noticed that in front of him stood the same two knights who had guarded Lady Schuer's chambers. The Duke remembered how the girl had asked him to call them by name if he met them, because they respected the Duke and would like it very much. Reca, passing by Mater and Lotres, said that they would see each other at training. After the Duke passed Lotres, in bewilderment said that he probably returned his feelings. Mater replied that it was all thanks to Lady Schuer. Meanwhile, our heroine slept soundly in her room furnished with flowers. Thus the whole night passed, and soon it was morning before the girl opened her eyes. Seeing the bright rays of the sun outside the window, the girl realized in horror that the Duke had left while she was sleeping. How could he have escaped at dawn? At that moment, the maid began knocking on her room door, asking the lady if she was awake. With tears in her eyes, the girl asked her to come in. Sally came into the room and said that she had put away the baskets and albums. Now what should she do with the remaining flowers? In a dream, the girl said that they would plant them and see what would come of it. Taking one of the flowers standing by her bed, she promised that she would make this garden come to life. At this point, the girl decided to ask if the previous Grand Duchess was from the north. Sally said that it was an old story and it would be better to wait for the Duke to return. Schuer was very surprised because Sally's reaction was different from Relda's strange. After a while, the action takes us to the corridor. The maids looked at the flowers and said that they had never seen so many before. Patton asked whether to take all the flowers to the garden, to which our heroine confidently said that all the flowers should be taken there. Then she said she would like to see some information about the north. Are there any reference materials? Josefina and the other maids, as well as the butler, looked at her in bewilderment and asked if she really wanted to know more about the north. Schuer didn't understand why they were reacting that way, but she said that she must not make mistakes if she wanted to stay with the Duke. At that moment, Patton proudly said that he knew this day would come someday. He has to temporarily take care of the affairs of the late Duchess. Our heroine asked him in surprise if this was true. The man answered that he had been taking care of this family for many years. Schuer then suggested that he had even seen the Duke's childhood. Patton laughed and said that he had certainly seen it. Our heroine looked at the butler in bewilderment and asked him what he was like. Was there a portrait of him as a child? How small was he? The man said he had to tell them the origins of their story first. Meanwhile, Josefina and the other maids were just crying, but Schuer didn't understand what the problem was. So if we are talking about the Blain family, it is said that even before the empire was created, their ancestors were making their way. Dragons did not dare roar, the seas parted, and the earth split. Patton said that all this happened when the ancestors took the blade in their hands. Our heroine nevertheless sighed and decided that she would better look for books. After all, she wants to know details about the Duke's childhood. Meanwhile, the action takes us to the Duke. Jess asked what happened. The man said in surprise that he suddenly felt discomfort. Looking around, he said that this was most likely due to monsters. And again, the action moves to the palace. The butler was still telling the fascinating story of the ancestors, and our heroine was telling Sally that it was time for them to go to the garden. At that moment, the girl picked up the chamomile, but it in turn simply exploded. The maid dropped all her things and rushed to Lady Shure, asking her if everything was all right. Our heroine said that she accidentally used the power on the flower, and it exploded. No big deal, but the speed of the action is certainly astonishing. Sally asked her to take care of herself because she was the only mistress of the North. At that moment, she also decided to ask when their wedding would take place. Shure asked if the Duke would agree to wear a white uniform. Sally nodded her head, but our heroine was still thinking that first she wanted to get the magic stones and restore the garden. Anyway, Shure asked where Relda was. The man thought for a moment and then said that he usually didn't leave the tower, but at that moment our heroine noticed someone outside the window. The girl immediately smiled and said that she seemed to have already found him. Soon the girl turned around and ran, saying that she would be back soon. After some time, our heroine was already on the street, and as she got closer, she could not understand why he had become taller. Relda turned around at that moment and told Shure that she was sneaking up on him silently as always, and he couldn't get used to it. Our heroine simply stared at him in bewilderment and could not look away. The guy said anyway that it didn't matter if she came anyway, it was simply impossible to create a large number of stones quickly, so he came back for a short time. Holding out a small bag of magic crystals, the boy said that judging by the size of the garden, this should be enough. Shure smiled at him and thanked him. Relda laughed and said that she thanked him so often that he had nothing to complain about. Our heroine at this point decided to ask the master of the magic tower if he could use recording magic. Relda was surprised that her demands were growing. Nevertheless, the girl handed him a flower and said that she would give him a daisy. The guy asked in confusion what it was. Shure, knowing what could be done with this flower, assumed that it could also be a threat. After a while, he snatched the exploded flower, and the girl said that since she gave him the flower, would he make the recording stones? Relda still didn't understand why she needed them. Shure asked him if he had ever seen the Grand Duke in a white uniform. The guy, perplexed, asked if she really wanted to make a recording with him and bribe the magician. Shure told him it was just a suggestion, she didn't want to miss the moment, and the Duke's appearance in a white uniform had to be preserved. At that moment, the maid said that flowers had arrived. Our heroine turned around and happily said that she was already on her way. Relda asked the lady why she was so interested in his white uniform. The girl smiled and said without a doubt that it would give her strength. Meanwhile, the action takes us to the Duke, who swung his blade and cut a huge monster in half. As he wiped away the monster's blood, he gradually felt that when he used the sword energy, his emotions gradually disappeared. Maybe he hadn't done this for too long. Either way, it was so familiar and so comfortable. Some things might be annoying, but he couldn't survive without them. And again, the action takes us to the palace, or rather to the garden, where both the maids and the knights worked. The boys asked Lady Shure where they should plant flowers. Our heroine happily said that they need a fourth zone, but Patton should be planted in Zone 3. Soon, when the Duke returned from the expedition, the garden was already filled with flowers. Having picked one of the flowers, our heroine said that she now understands the value of magic stones. It was hard to believe that such a large garden could be made so warm. At this point, her monologue was interrupted by Relda, who said that he never imagined that he would have to take off his robe in the north because of the heat. Also, the guy lying on the ground said that butterflies might appear here sooner or later. Shure looked at him in surprise and asked if he wanted flowers. All these strange thoughts ran through her head. Magical recording stones, a duke in a white uniform, a duke, a recording. The magician waved his hand anyway and said that he himself did not know whether he needed it or not. Shure realized that they probably only interested him on the first day. Either way, she didn't understand why he kept coming to the garden. At that moment, our heroine saw knights with the robes of people from the expedition. Only when she noticed this did the girl assume that the Duke had finally returned. She ran towards him as fast as she could, but at that very moment she was stopped by the Duke's cold and piercing gaze. The girl stopped in horror because of this. She almost forgot that he lost emotions when he used the sword's energy. He must have spent all his strength on this trip. In any case, the girl understood that she was ready for this. She turned to the Duke and said that she wanted to show him something. She checked his schedule, and he spends most of his time in his office, and there is a big window in it. The man said that was true. Our heroine added that she had looked around and noticed that the garden would be visible from it. Immediately noticing the Duke's expression, she said that she had not touched anything there. However, the gaze was still fixed on her, so she looked away and said that perhaps she had touched several things. He sighed heavily and said that everything was clear. Shuer waved her hands and said that she had not touched the documents, but only his chair and some furniture. Again, the man nodded his head and said that everything was fine. However, our heroine closed his eyes and said that this was not all. However, at this point, they were interrupted by Jess, who was shocked by the huge number of flowers in the north. He had not expected this. Shuer smiled and said that she had planted the flowers that the Duke had given her. Beautiful, isn't it? At that moment, the man asked in surprise if she wanted to show him the garden. Our heroine smiled and told him that he would see the garden as soon as he went to the office. After some time, the man was heading to his office through the corridors of the palace. Strangely enough, all these flowers did not impress him at all. He had never been interested in the garden. It seems that Shuer wanted to show off the bouquets he gave her. It's obvious Shuer remained the same as she was before the expedition. Entering his office, the man said that during all this time only he had changed once again. People breathe every moment, but they don't put any meaning into it. For him, the whole world looks like that. He just sees, hears, and lives. One way or another, looking around, he understood that no matter how you looked at everything that was happening, everything here was new. The boy noticed the flag in confusion and was surprised that Shuer used the family crest. He didn't understand why he had been called here anyway. However, at that moment, shouts began to be heard from behind the Duke. The man turned around and looked outside to see Shuer screaming and waving her arms. Reca asked in bewilderment if this was really her way of asking for a new dress. In any case, they would go downtown together and buy it. However, the girl asked the Duke to look at the big picture. The man, perplexed, answered her that he did not understand what she was talking about. He asked if it was really about the portrait she wanted to paint. The girl nevertheless asked him to look at the whole landscape. Our heroine stood in the middle of a beautiful field of flowers and circled around. In the center, by the way, there was another designated place. As if anticipating the Duke's question of "What is it?" she asked if she could put his statue there. She was thinking of putting a flower crown on it. However, she would not mind if the Duke did it himself, and she prepared everything. Either way, the man said that she would do it her way, so she doesn't have to pretend that she cares about his opinion, which means she can do whatever she wants. Soon after, something incredible happened, because the Duke was finally able to smile. It was the first time he saw this world so colorful. In any case, several days passed, and finally the day of departure to the center arrived. Sally wished a good trip. Our heroine, standing near the carriage, said that she was curious about something. Looking at Relda, she asked him why he looked like that. The boy said he was using the child labor law to his advantage. Reca explained that he was trying to act small and manipulate people around him. Shuer asked if it worked. The guy replied that the Duke didn't feel sorry for him at all and called him out on any occasion. It only worked against the Marquis. By the way, it's better not to say that this is his weakness. In any case, Relda waved his hand and told the guys to go, and he will eat well and have fun. Immediately after the words of the master of the magic tower, the carriage moved off. In the carriage, our heroine asked the Duke if there was a place in the center where she could find historical information about Blain. The man asked why she needed it. Shuer smiled and said that she wanted to know this in order to get to know the Duke better. Soon she asked if he could show her a portrait from his childhood at least once a year. The man turned away and said that they did not have such a thing. In any case, he turned around and said that the central library might have the information she needed. Shuer said that there was almost no data in the north. She knew that Blain had originally been in the center, but due to the expeditions, most of the clan had moved north when they gained independence by treaty. Shuer somehow understood that she would have to go to the center either to search for information or for marriage. At this point, she turned to the Grand Duke and asked if she could ask him to hold her hand just once. Then she would be able to handle everything. Then she asked him if he was interested in what had happened while they were working in the garden. She would, for example, like to hear about his expedition. Reca sighed heavily and said that she was too noisy, but still extended his hand. However, at this point, our heroine realized that by this time, Reca should be engaged to the crown prince. There was a period in the Netri family when none of the daughters blossomed. At that time, Reca received many proposals from suitors. Obviously, everyone wanted to gain fame for the family, and no one believed that she would become the heir. She couldn't stand it, so she made the principal proposals. She asked to be engaged to her, and then she would demonstrate the energy of the ball for these 2 years. She promised him to make the empire so strong that no one would touch it. The crown prince kept his promise, and now she must protect him. Shuer also knew that her sister's first meeting with the Duke began with a handshake. Our heroine looked at the Duke and asked him what he felt. Puzzled, he said that he felt the handshake. Shuer understood that with Reca he felt differently. She could not replace the main character. Either way, the girl didn't understand why her sister was sure that she would blossom in 2 years. It was unlikely that the power would be transferred to her while she was alive. In any case, after some time, our heroes reached the center. Looking around, our heroine was surprised because the center was very different from the north. At that moment, while the guys were examining the territory, a man approached them and said hello. Reca looked at His Highness and greeted him. Our heroine realized that the time had come. This is the same man that Reca chose, and the original Shuer loved before us is the protagonist of the novel The Crown Prince of the Empire, Silcaro Waker. The guy, however, immediately said that he had not been warned that the Duke would not be alone. It seems that the daughter of the Netri family is standing in front of him. The Duke nodded his head, indicating that everything was correct. This was Shuer Netri, and she would be his life partner. Our heroine greeted His Highness. The Crown Prince asked again in surprise, and then said that he never thought he would hear such news. In any case, they had postponed their tea party because they had heard of the Duke's arrival. Would they like to join in? Shuer didn't understand why he was acting as if he were seeing her for the first time. Of course, it was impossible not to know about the original Shuer's feelings because she clearly demonstrated them. The Duke said one way or another that he was not a fan of tea parties. The prince, however, added that the daughter of the Marquis of Henner was also with them. Our heroine was perplexed. Could it be that they were talking about the Marquis from the meeting in the north? Reca immediately changed his mind and said that he would not stay with them for long. After some time, Silcaro introduced Duke Blain as well as an unexpected guest, Shuer Netri, also the Duke's companion. Before them was the daughter of the Marquis Henner. Betty smiled and said that she was glad to meet him and also that she had heard a lot from her father. Then another person entered the conversation, asking His Highness to allow her to introduce herself. Before them was Reca Netri, the second commander of the Imperial Knights. The girl looked down at her sister and said that they hadn't seen each other for quite some time. Sitting down at the table, Shuer greeted her back. Silcaro said at that moment that he and the lady had had a short conversation, but the atmosphere around them had changed so much that he didn't even recognize her. Our heroine smiled and said that most likely these changes were caused by the Duke. Doesn't the prince know that she was excommunicated from the family? Reca didn't talk about personal matters. Silcaro started to talk about something carefree. Shuer noticed something surprising, namely that Silcaro didn't care about anything, while Reca was clearly uncomfortable here. At this moment, the Crown Prince thoughtfully said that he had heard that the Duke had recently participated in an expedition, although this was not a very interesting topic for a lady. Reca nevertheless said that everything was fine because she wanted to find out everything herself. The man, in any case, suggested that the swordsmen have a separate conversation. He assumed that it was not worth disturbing the other ladies' tea party. At this point, of course, our heroine only begged them not to leave in bewilderment. Shuer understood that if something was destined, then it should at least happen before her eyes. At that moment, the prince had already headed in the other direction and was calling the Duke to go with him. Our heroine nevertheless grabbed the man before leaving and asked him not to touch anything with his hands. After all, he didn't give her any portraits or a wedding ring, so he shouldn't hold hands with other people. No handshakes, not even with the fingertips. Reca recalled that she had said that he would be free to do whatever he wanted, but now she was restricting him. Shuer asked if he wanted her to call him Duke instead of Kitten. He sighed heavily and asked if even handshakes were forbidden since she had taken his hand herself. However, Shuer still asked him to promise her otherwise everyone would hear her calling him Kitten. The man said that he understood everything, and our heroine immediately turned around and apologized to the lady for being distracted for a moment by a personal conversation. At this point, Betty said that her father had advised her to attend the tea party when he went downtown, but she had no idea that things would turn out this way. Our heroine immediately asked if she had given the camellia branch. Betty smiled and said that it was true, her father had asked her about it. Giving bouquets in the North is certainly romantic. The girl assumed that she and the Duke had a good relationship, by the way, although other people are afraid to ask this, but what did she love about the Duke? Shuer said without a doubt that she loved his tough side. The Grand Duke is responsible, always gets things done, does everything perfectly. She also couldn't help but say that he was patient and willing to listen to others. It was also funny that he raised his finger when he was deep in thought. By the way, he often crosses his arms after 2 steps. Betty, who was listening to all this, said in bewilderment that she did not know about this. Shuer smiled and said that there were some secret things that only she knew. For example, that his 13th eyelash was a little longer than the others. Betty asked in bewilderment if she really was watching even that. Our heroine replied that she liked to watch the changes in his not very expressive face. At that very moment, a male voice was heard behind her saying that now he understood why she was looking at him. Turning around, she saw the Duke and the Crown Prince. Reca told Shuer that her words could be heard even in the corridor. Silkero laughed and said that it was the first time he had seen Lady Henner so talkative. Our heroine was glad that the Duke had already returned. However, looking at them, she wondered, where did Irina go? Why did they come back together? The prince, as if reading her words, said that Irina had some business. No need to be upset. Soon there will be a banquet in honor of the Duke's arrival, and they will meet there. Nevertheless, our heroine was in shock. They barely found a way to come, and he wants to take the Duke for himself? Is this such torture? The Crown Prince at this point said that he could talk about swords all night long, but then everyone would hate him, even the ladies. He said that there were few people in the center who had studied the Blain style, so everyone was waiting for the Duke to arrive. There was no need to feel burdened, and it was better to enjoy the banquet. After some time, our heroine's bad mood changed to a cheerful one because she didn't know that preparing for a banquet could be so fun. Moreover, they were even given 1 guest room for 2 together with the Duke. Isn't that happiness? At this point, the man said that sometimes he had the thought that he was just a doll for her that needed to be dressed up. However, Shuer told him that he looked great in any clothes. What was wrong with that? In that case, the man said he was right. Anyway, the girl decided to ask him why he always wore gloves. Reca replied that they were important for swordsmen and helped to avoid unnecessary cuts. In any case, he hoped that it wouldn't make her uncomfortable, so he extended his hand to her anyway. Our heroine, however, was not upset at all. On the contrary, she liked the way he took care of himself and others. Shuer was nervous the whole time she arrived in the center, but now she will try to enjoy the area. At that moment, she said that she would soon be able to see the Duke's sleeping face. Reca asked in confusion what she was talking about. Shuer smiled and said that he looked great. She was curious to see it, and by the way, the magic recording stone would come in handy. In any case, at this moment, the knight began to greet the Grand Duke Reca Blain and his companion, Lady Shuer Netri. Our heroine thought it was pretty funny because she was excommunicated from her family and should have been called by her first name, but they added a last name, so the reason was obvious. It was all about the idea that the exiled daughter had returned as a Grand Duchess, an interesting rumor that everyone would definitely want to discuss. Obviously, some families might be angry if such a position were to be filled by a girl with no last name. As people walked past the crowd, they said that it was as if Shuer had just imitated her sister and flirted with others, but had ended up joining such a family. Shuer knew she wanted to take the surname Blain, but the banquet was held the day before the marriage license was approved. In any case, the girl, having heard rumors around, asked the Duke if he also thought that she had deceived him. Reca asked in surprise if she had deceived him. The girl replied that this was not the case at all, but the man gave an answer that shocked Shuer. The Duke doesn't care about rumors, only what he sees personally, and he doesn't understand other people's feelings. And that's something she definitely needs to know. Our heroine was undoubtedly incredibly happy to hear these very words. Soon after some time, our heroine noticed several strange looks on her. However, as soon as she turned her head, they in turn turned theirs away. Could they not greet the Duke because of her? Anyway, at that moment, a girl passed by them and approached the Duke and said that the second commander of the Imperial Knights was greeting him. Reincarnated bowed and greeted the Duke and Shuer again. Our heroine, in turn, did not really understand why she was introducing herself. However, the girl immediately apologized to her sister for leaving her in the morning because her father was very surprised by the news. She said that her father was worried that she would have to marry without a dowry. Shuer smiled and said that she had a dowry, so thank you for your concern. It was still strange that they had sent her away empty-handed, and now they were raising the issue themselves. Reca looked at her sister in surprise and asked if she really had a dowry. However, the dowry was not money but the best cockerel that she brought with her, and therefore it must be taken into account. The sister, however, knew that Shuer was lying, so she reminded her that she had left empty-handed, and what was that to mean? At this point, Shuer turned to the Duke, telling him that he seemed unable to talk to the other guests because of her, so he might as well take his leave. Reca didn't understand what was going on because he didn't really notice people who wanted to talk to him. Turning his head, he noticed a whole bunch of piercing glances at himself. The man sighed heavily and said that he now understood, and in that case he would be back soon. Meanwhile, Reca thought that her sister had one-sided love, but everything looks completely different. In any case, she decided that their situation was very strange. Shuer suddenly said that the Duke was very handsome. Noticing her sister's strange look, Shuer said that she didn't share this so that she would stare at him. Reca didn't really understand why she asked that question, so she asked to speak directly. Shuer sighed and said that it was a normal question. The girl decided to change the news, saying that her sister probably hadn't heard the news, but she was already engaged to His Highness Silkero. Our heroine was incredibly happy. She wished them to live in the capital for 1,000,000 years, but not to poke their noses into the north. Reca nevertheless asked her sister what she was thinking about because she had not been interested in the north before. Our heroine proudly said that love is always an uninvited guest, and now it lives in her heart. The girl looked at the Duke and noticed that he was looking at her even when there was a crowd of people around him. Our heroine was incredibly happy about this because the Grand Duke was looking at her. Reca was getting angrier and angrier with each passing second. She asked her sister to behave normally because everyone in the capital knew that she was from the Netri family. The girl nevertheless asked in surprise what was so special about it. Was she really doing this to the prince? Although it was unlikely, they didn't seem to be particularly close people. Reca asked not to talk nonsense because for sure everything would end with a simple departure to the north, but certainly not for her. Soon after these words, the girl silently turned around and left. One of the knights asked the commander if everything was okay. In any case, the action takes us some time ahead. Our heroine, to her surprise, met Betty and the others. The girl said that she felt that her conversation with her sister was going in the wrong direction. She would soon be a great duchess. Was it possible to communicate so rudely then? Our heroine said that they wouldn't see her anyway when she went north. However, Betty said that Reca could at least pretend to congratulate her. She didn't understand where the rumors about her good nature came from. Shuer asked to forget about it, and then asked if these were really Betty's close friends. The girl smiled and said that she had just wanted to introduce them. The first was Annabelle Lytton. She had become interested in Shuer after hearing stories from her father. Our heroine thought about it and soon decided that it seemed to be nobles from the capital. What could they have heard about her? The woman smiled and said that before the wedding her last name was Sizon. Perhaps now she recognized it. Ah, Shuer exclaimed in surprise, saying that this was the name of Baron Arter. The girl smiled and said that it was correct. He was her father. However, our heroine told her that she looked young, so she didn't think that she was married. Annabelle said that she met her husband at the academy, and the wedding was early. In any case, the next one introduced was Sola Matteo, who was the daughter of Count Matteo, who was friendly to the north. At the same time, Annabelle said that they had recently received invitations from the Netri family. It seemed that Irina was trying to gather all the capital's nobles around her. Our heroine immediately realized that this was her most obvious plan, but for some reason it was going slower than she expected. Irina received an engagement from the prince and promised something in return. This condition was to unite the nobles of the center. By the way, the central part is divided into 4 categories: those who support the Netri family, people who have studied the Blain style, then the supporters of the crown prince Silcaro. And of course, in this whole conflict, there could not be no neutrals who do not support the previous groups. However, these people are neutral only at first glance. In fact, these nobles do not approve of the influence of the Blain family in the center, which remained after the independence of the north. Unfortunately, it turned out that the neutrals were the ideal prey for Irina. Invitations to meetings were a common method of recruitment, one of the steps towards complete isolation of the north. Moreover, Annabelle said that according to rumors, His Highness Silcaro will also participate. They must respond somehow. Sol asked in surprise if the prince did not favor the North. Annabelle said that the imperial family had always tried to be neutral. However, this engagement with Irina was only a source of concern. If His Highness Silcaro were to extend his hands, then, at that very moment, the crown prince appeared behind Sol, and with a smile on his face, he asked if they were talking about him. Annabelle covered her face with her fan in horror, and the man apologized for interrupting their conversation so rudely. He explained that he had no chance to talk to the Duke because he was busy, so he wanted to kidnap Lady Schuer for a minute. He also added that he had grown up close to the Duke, so he could tell a lot about him. Schuer took this as a challenge to a duel to see who knew the Duke better. Anyway, in the novel, this guy was a man who favored the North in exchange for receiving some fencing tips from the Duke. But it is obvious that in the end, all this was destroyed by feelings for Irina. Our heroine understood that she was not going to break all ties with the capital, so she would agree. She knew little about the latest news in the center, but she would still accept the prince's offer. After some time, they were on the balcony. The prince asked the girl if she wanted to drink something. The girl smiled and said that she would refuse. At this moment, the crown prince leaned over and asked Lady Schuer if she liked the capital. The girl said that the weather here is quite pleasant, but in the south it is too hot, while in the north it is too cold. Silcaro smiled and said that she was right. That was one of the advantages of the center. Schuer thought that the prince behaved like that at the tea party because of the presence of other people. Yet even now he continues to pretend that they are meeting for the first time. He cannot help but remember her. Our heroine knew that the original Schuer was pursuing him like crazy. For example, the girl picked up a watering can and said that she had something important to tell him. She heard about the engagement with Irina. The prince nevertheless asked Schuer to stop sneaking into his garden using the family's influence. Without thinking twice, she turned the watering can over and began pouring water directly onto His Highness's head. Silcaro raised his head in bewilderment and asked the girl what she was doing. The girl answered him that she was just watering the flowers, so she asked him to bloom just for her. Schuer had certainly gone too far, but it was awkward to pretend. It was necessary to make it clear Schuer had said right away that she had been excommunicated from the Netri family. Silcaro, however, said that he knew since both Irina and the Duke had reported it. Schuer then did not understand why he was behaving this way. The guy asked if that was something surprising. It is enough to be happy with what you have. Many families wean their children because in this world, marriages of convenience are common. In any case, he decided to say that he wanted to talk to her, which is why he called her here. Schuer assumed that the conversation would not be about the Duke. Meanwhile, the Duke does not shake hands as he promised. Unexpectedly, the prince said that the Duke is a very respected knight and man. He knows this too. He was more interested in the fact that Lady Schuer had changed after being expelled from her family. He remembered her as an ambitious and cunning girl. Schuer smiled and told him that true love changes a person. She thought that the same thing had happened to her and the Duke. The prince leaned over her and said that judging by the way she constantly looked at another man in his presence, it was true. Schuer looked at Silcaro in bewilderment and asked how she was supposed to understand this. Was he drunk? The guy continued to smile, however, and said that he was not drunk because champagne does not make him drunk. Our heroine then wanted to know what he meant. The prince said that others were talking about Lady Shuer's intelligence. Couldn't she guess it herself? The girl said that it seemed to her that he was interested in her. The prince thought about it and said that in a sense he was. However, our heroine decided that he was crazy and decided to remind him that he was engaged to Irina, and those around him say that they have a good relationship. The guy said that Irina was his closest ally, but nothing more. Shuer understood that everything was no longer in line with the novel. The girl said that tomorrow she would become the Duke's wife. However, the prince said that he had not thought that this bothered her, and therefore the rumors are different. They say that if this is a close Irina, then she is ready to charm anyone, regardless of gender status. Our heroine asked in bewilderment if it was true. Silcaro suddenly reminded her that she herself had offered to meet him sometimes, even if he got engaged to Irina. The girl immediately thought about it. Maybe she should hit him on the head with a glass? In novels after that, they often forget some things. She decided in any case that it was better not to rush into something like this because it would not end well. Shuer apologized and said that it was no longer her concern. The girl said that she truly loved the Duke, and soon after that, she turned around because she did not want to listen to this nonsense. However, before opening the door and leaving, the prince pointed out that the Duke was losing his emotions. He asked her how long she could fill the abyss inside him. Could she handle it? Our heroine remembered how the Duke tried to fulfill her requests for her sake, so she confidently said that she would be faithful to him until the end of her life. And again, Silcaro started to go to her, saying that the feeling of love will not last more than 3 years. After the wedding, many couples get tired of marriage but continue to endure it. The prince acknowledged the great Duke's skill, but without sword techniques it was practically useless. The prince asked the girl if she was smart. Shuer must understand whose side to choose. Our heroine suddenly said that the Duke is so tall that he always stands out from the rest. She thinks that she can find him in any situation. The girl immediately asked the prince if he had seen how that same emotionless man could frown. That's her job. The girl also said that his black hair was to his taste. The prince asked again what she was trying to say with all this. Our heroine turned around and told him that she had long ago chosen which side she belonged to. However, just before leaving, the man put his hand on the door and blocked the passage. Turning around, the girl noticed how the prince burst into laughter for some reason unknown to her. Silcaro soon apologized to Shuer and said that given her past, he wanted to check with what intentions she had in getting close to the Duke. Our heroine looked at this guy with even greater bewilderment and contempt. Anyway, the Crown Prince continued to laugh and say that it was all just a misunderstanding for which he asked for forgiveness. Silcaro asked her to consider this a kind of test, because he was just as worried about the Duke as she was. Shuer knew that this was not a lie and that he really thought so. Our heroine smiled at the prince and told him that she understood what he wanted to convey to her. In any case, she wanted to get to the Duke as soon as possible. One way or another, after a couple of seconds, the girl said goodbye to the prince and went back inside. When she walked in, she noticed all these surprised looks. Unfortunately, people avoided her because of Shuer's past from the original novel. However, she was not interested in all this. Approaching the Duke, she asked him to buy wedding rings. People around him began to whisper, asking why he was talking about such things at a banquet. They were sure he would demand something impossible. Anyway, our heroine needed only the Duke. Shuer asked him to find more and a ring that stood out. The man immediately said that he was a swordsman, so he would not be able to wear something that bothered him. In this case, she offered to write her name on his back instead of a ring. She assured Reca that it would be unnoticeable. With a heavy sigh, the man said that he would try to think of something. Our heroine smiled because she was very happy to hear this, because she was pleased that Reca was making concessions for her sake. Soon after, she turned to the guests and asked them not to disturb the Duke too much and to return him to her safely. The girl immediately turned around and walked away from the bewildered banquet guests. After a while, the action takes us to Shuer and Annabelle. The girl asked what His Highness had said. Was he angry? Our heroine said that Silcaro told her several things about the Duke. Annabelle exhaled, saying that she was scared because she thought that he would do something to her. Shuer smiled and thanked the girl for her concern. In any case, she advised to forget everything. Our heroine looked at Cameo and said that she was beautiful. Annabelle smiled back and said it was a new hot item at the center. Lovers engrave each other's images and carry them around. Hers is of her darling's face. Our heroine immediately realized that she could make jewelry with the Duke's image. Shure asked if she understood correctly that her husband had the same thing with her. Annabelle smiled and said that was correct. Although some shameless people, by the way, carve their secret lovers on them, she suggested asking the Duke to make them. The girl assumed that he should know about this trend because, according to her husband, the Duke often came to the center. By the way, data about the North and the family is also stored in the center. Shure smiled and said that she had lived in the North recently, so her knowledge of the center was limited. Where can I find information related to this? Soul intervened in their conversation and said that if they had free time, they could visit the capital's library. There were many books about the North there. Betty smiled and said that Soul loved to read, so she often visited there. She could be very useful. The girl sheepishly said that this was an exaggeration. Shure immediately asked if she had time to give her a tour the next day. Soul sheepishly said that she would be happy to help. Annabelle at this point asked what the idea was about having tea after the visit to the library. Shure thought about it and said that it was a great idea. However, looking back, our heroine noticed Irina's gaze on her. Her sister was staring at her too, obviously. It was understandable why Shure's back was burning then. Suddenly, some guy came up to her, pointed at Shure, and told her something. The girl immediately handed over her glass. After a couple of seconds, she headed towards her sister and soon said that she wanted to talk. Irina immediately said that she had already asked not to disturb the prince, or maybe there weren't enough people around her. Our heroine looked at her in surprise and said that His Highness had called her himself. Irina told her sister not to make up dirty excuses. The girl told her that she couldn't even show the power of flowering, but her self-confidence was still the same. Shure laughed in her mind, thinking that she was talking to a wall. However, at that moment, Irina asked her sister if she knew what kind of people she hated the most. Those who are only capable of talking but cannot put in a single bit of effort. Those who only talk about their beliefs but are not ready to defend them, and lastly, those whose greed goes far beyond their capabilities. Our heroine asked her sister in bewilderment if her relationship with the prince was really that terrible. The girl asked not to make her laugh. Irina asked to imagine that she had an older sister who was trying to take everything away. Would she remain calm? Without a doubt, Shure nodded her head. The girl looked at her in bewilderment, and our heroine replied that the Duke had no feelings for anyone anyway. Shure assumed that her sister had a flower garden in her head instead of a brain. Irina began to leave anyway, but told her sister to be quiet while she remained in the capital and not to interfere in other people's affairs. Reca saw with his own eyes how our heroine communicated with her side. He understood that first Prince Silkero had come to Shure, now Irina. Why did they all take her aside? In the North, she was always surrounded by people, but why is Shure now all alone? At this point, the boy approached the Duke and asked his lordship if he had gotten to know Lady Shure well before marrying her. The man looked at the boy in surprise and asked what he was supposed to know. The boy immediately said that the rumors about her were not the most pleasant. He explained that she was known for getting close to people and throwing them away when they were no longer useful, perhaps then. Reca immediately interrupted him and said that if he heard about this again in the future, he would know who started it all. The guy immediately started waving his hands, saying that it wasn't him who came up with it, but many other people. A few seconds later, the Duke approached Shure and told her that they could leave if she was tired. He was not a big fan of such places. Our heroine smiled again because she was glad that the Duke had come to her at such a lonely hour. After a while, the action moves to their room. Shure was getting ready for bed and the Duke was reading some documents. As soon as the Duke placed his hand on the table, one could see a huge number of scars on his hand. Shure asked him in surprise if he had always had those scars. Reca replied that every swordsman had them. However, the girl said there were many of them. Could it really have been monsters? Reca thoughtfully said that it was possible. Shure immediately said that she hoped that these were not people. The Duke immediately asked the girl in surprise what she would do if these were people. Our heroine told me to give them their addresses, and then she would send letters of happiness every day. Reca asked in bewilderment if she was really a fortune teller. The girl asked in bewilderment if he didn't know about sending chain letters. Reca said that he knew about it, but it was too much trouble. Shure decided to change the subject, so she lay down on the bed and asked if there were serious problems in the north. The Duke seemed very busy. He replied that the number of monsters had increased and the reason was unknown. People had been traveling without him, so it was impossible to say whether it was due to his rest. Shure immediately realized that the Duke would have to travel more often in the future, and immediately the words of the prince which still troubled her came to mind. At this point, our heroine decided to ask what the Duke's predecessors did when they lost all their emotions. Without hesitation, the Duke said that they were all dying. Our heroine's expression changed to shock. Reca said that this is the rule of the Blain family. Without emotions, a person is unable to distinguish between good and evil, allies and enemies. At such a moment, the head of the clan must go deep into the northern mountains and take as many monsters as possible to the next world. Our heroine immediately understood why Reca died in the novel during the expedition. His death was called retirement because he chose it himself. Shure said that she previously thought that they simply lost emotions but death. The Duke said that people instinctively look for what they lack. Shure asked in surprise what happens next if the heir is not ready. Reca replied that the management passes to the Grand Duchess and she takes the position. Now our heroine understood Relda's words as well as Sally's words, who asked her to look strong at the meeting. In any case, the Duke said that she had nothing to worry about because his emotions were returning. They should think about additional measures and ask Relda for help. Our heroine decided to ask when the Duke began to lose emotions. He answered that he did not remember. Shure asked what his emotions were like at that time. The guy said he didn't remember it either. The emotions faded and burned until there was almost nothing left. He remembers the fact of the loss, but he feels nothing. Shure understood that she had answered Silcaro's question confidently, but at some point the Duke would get used to her and become indifferent to her. Reca turned his head and told the girl that she had become too silent. The girl smiled and said that she was thinking about when the Duke would sleep. The guy immediately asked her to go to bed first. Although they had arrived in the capital, he had things to do. Shure asked in bewilderment, was he really not going to sleep? She was madly waiting for this moment. By the way, now it feels like he is sleeping and with his eyes open. She was interested to see him sleeping. Reca at that moment asked not to look at him like that. Shure fell in despair, saying that she had lived until today to see the sleeping face of his lordship. He asked in surprise why she needed it. The girl said she hadn't seen him yet, but he still asked what was so special about him. Apparently, she didn't really need a reason. She wanted to know all the little things about the one she loved. Our heroine smiled and suggested that he at least pretend to be asleep. The man asked in surprise what good it would do. Shure said sheepishly that his beloved Shure was afraid to sleep alone. However, the man only looked at her in bewilderment, as if asking her to let him work. With a heavy sigh, the girl apologized, and then said that she hated the workaholic Duke. Reca only asked her to cover herself with a blanket. Shure told him she was not a child. However, the Duke said she was behaving like a little one. Even the maids had more trouble. At this point, our heroine said she wanted a cameo with his face engraved on it. The Duke said the Duchess of Lytton had mentioned it. Does she like that kind of thing? Our heroine was surprised that he did not refuse. At that moment, Shure asked the Duke in surprise if he really would not sleep at all. The man said that if she decided to constantly distract him, then he would have to give up. Soon the action moves to a time when they were already asleep. The Duke woke up and decided to get up to continue working, but noticing the girl's gaze on him, he asked why she wasn't sleeping if that's what she wanted. Shure answered him that she couldn't sleep when he was next to her. And indeed, looking at him, everything seemed like a dream to her. When she sees the Duke, she has thoughts that everything around is unreal. At that moment, the girl reached her hand to his face and, placing it on his head, began to stroke it. However, to our heroine's surprise, the man snatched her hand and stared at her. The girl asked what had happened, to which the Duke said that she had asked too many questions, so covering her eyes with his hand, he told her to sleep. Nevertheless, the girl still raised his hand and looked at him again. The man looked at her in surprise and asked what happened this time. Placing her hand on her forehead, she asked the Duke to keep his hand there, and then she would postpone looking at his face until tomorrow. With a heavy sigh, the Duke said that sometimes it seemed to him that she would risk looking at his sleeping face even at the cost of her life. Soon the rough feelings, the rough movements, all this in the Grand Duke seemed awkward but brought her peace. Thus, Shure fell asleep. Taking his hand away from her face, he said that she was very noisy, but still had something about her that caught his attention. Then he looked at his hand and wondered what she saw in that hand that she was showing such interest. The action shifts to the morning. Our heroine jumps up saying that she is about to see the Duke's sleeping face. Turning her head, she realized in horror that he was already gone, and even his warmth was already gone. The girl immediately became thoughtful. Could it be that the great Duke she saw at dawn was a dream? She decided that if she had dreamed something like that, she should lie down and finish the dream. However, at this point the Duke said that her behavior did not change even immediately after waking up, and yet it was not a dream. Getting out of bed, our heroine actually saw the Duke, who was getting dressed at that moment. Shure asked him in surprise if he was really going to the training ground. The man said that he had a lot of things to do in the morning, so he had no free time. He would send the bouquet later. In any case, he apologized if he woke her up because he wanted to leave quietly. Shure knew that the Duke had many scars, but she did not know that they were so scarred. Shure smiled anyway and said that everything was fine. She was glad to see him in the morning. The girl started waving her hand and wishing Reca good luck in training. Before leaving, the Duke turned to the girl and reminded her that their marriage registration was ending today. Looking at Shure, the man said that she was now the Grand Duchess Shure Blain, and he congratulated her on this. After these words, the man headed out of the room, and the maid said goodbye to him. Immediately after the Duke left, the woman asked the Duchess if she wanted to start preparing. Our heroine nevertheless happily asked the maid if she thought Shure and Blain went well together. The woman smiled and said she was right. Anyway, she apologized and said that the Duchess of Lytton had sent an invitation to tea. What would Shure order? The girl said that they had planned it, so she would write back. However, at this moment, our heroine stopped and asked the maid to wait. The girl jumped up in horror. She couldn't understand, was Shure unhappy? She had even been told that Netri's eldest daughter could hit. Our heroine fixed her gaze on the blanket and pillow and said that she wanted to take them. Soon, the action brings us to the capital's library. Shure came there with Sol, and the administrator asked their names. Our heroine smiled and said that her name was Shure Blain. The man pointed to the side and said that the books about the North were in section 172. Just a short time after they reached the desired section, Shure's face changed. The girl looked at all these shelves in bewilderment and said that there was too much information here. Sol told her that she had read 80% of the books. If the Duchess was interested in a particular topic, she could find the appropriate materials. Shure asked if there was anything about the origins of Blain, their sword technique and emotions. Sol said that if she was interested in the origins, it would be better to look at the scriptures. Our heroine asked her again in surprise, to which the girl said that everything was correct. How could she know the Waker Empire was founded by a messenger of God? Opening the book, she said that this is why the country is so closely connected with the temple. Long ago, the continent was in a period of turmoil. There were no leaders or countries, so humans and monsters lived together. Humanity had no rules or morals. However, amidst this chaos, a new axis of power was born. The Netri believed that humans could change for the better, so they protected them from the monsters. However, Blain in turn punished all who broke the rules, two forces whose principles were opposite. Some said that first you need to listen, and others that if these people do not want to die, then it was not worth breaking the laws. How are they different from monsters? However, Waker was a mediator between them. He calmed them down and said that they would listen to everyone first because it was never too late to punish. The conflict was getting worse one way or another, so the god gave Netri the power to protect others and Blain the power to subjugate and punish. Waker left predictions on 5 tablets and founded an empire with 2 families. The power given by the god was now called the family sword. After reading this, the girl decided that it was all a bit strange. Why didn't Blain have the ability to protect himself unlike Netri? At that moment, Sol asked in surprise if something was wrong. Our heroine said that everything was fine and thanked the girl again for her help. Smiling, she handed over the book and asked if there were any other recommendations Shure still had to save the Duke. Better to try everything than to regret doing nothing. After some time, the action takes us to tea with Anne Bell, who expressed her sincere congratulations to Her Highness Shure Blain. She was glad that the marriage registration was complete, which meant that she would now be referred to by her new surname. Shure was as happy about this as anyone else, so she thanked everyone for their congratulations. At that moment, the butler approached Her Highness Shure and apologized. The man handed over a bouquet of flowers and said that the Duke had given it to her. The girl took the bouquet in her hands in surprise and thanked her. She was surprised that the Duke kept his promise. Earlier in the morning, he had said that he would send flowers later. Betty asked in surprise if he really decided to congratulate her. Sol smiled and said that the ribbon was more expensive than the bouquet itself. Annabelle said it was an expensive fabric used for making clothes. His lordship is so insightful. Shure was surprised by this. In the north, the Duke only gave flowers, but in the capital, he even tied them with a ribbon. The message from His Grace the Duke was that he would be waiting for her in front of the main hall to attend the banquet together. After just a couple of minutes, our heroine finally came to his lordship. Shure asked what the bouquet was. Had he resorted to the sword again? The Duke said he was asleep, but he still heard her words. Our heroine looked at him in surprise and asked if he had already sent her a bouquet. The man asked in bewilderment who had sent her a bouquet. Shure pointed at him in surprise. The man asked when it happened, and the girl said that it happened during tea with Duchess Annabelle. He asked if there was a card or a note. Anything to indicate who had sent the bouquet, Shure said there was nothing. The girl immediately wondered who it could be. No one could even come to mind. If the sender wanted to impress, he would have left a name. Our heroine assumed that Jess and the Duke had somehow missed each other. Had Relda really sent them from the north? Anyway, at this point they started introducing Duke Reca Blain and Duchess Shure Blain. The action takes us to Relda. It seemed to him that things were going strangely. There was absolutely no mood. It seemed as if that noisy girl was never out of his memory. At that moment, the butler said that the statue had arrived. Shouldn't Mrs. Shure look at it? The butler said that the lady was rather picky. In his opinion, it seemed quite likely that his lordship. Saley suggested storing it indoors, such as in an empty guest room. Relda laughed, thinking about how the statues were now kept in the guest rooms, and then what were they planning to do with it? The guy turned around, thinking that even though he said that he would supposedly look after the north, there was no particular point. The entire garden was covered in the Duchess's magic. In any case, he decided that he was doing terrific. Things were getting better here. There are so many things that can't be explained even by magic. For example, the family sword. Unlike dark magic, sacred powers and magic require sacrifices. However, Blain's sword is different. Although they use the same magic and sword skills, the result is completely different from Netri, but the difference is almost imperceptible. By the way, Relda suddenly asked if Shure mentioned that someone else had blossomed, but why was the energy of the garden so similar to the energy of the sword? It was still strange, so you have to be more careful. He was unlucky. Not only is he not particularly talented, but he also became a duke at the most inconvenient moment. However, at that moment, an explosion was heard behind Relda. The guy even jumped up in surprise. Turning around, he noticed a chicken in front of him holding a branch in its beak. The guy was puzzled and said that this was no longer funny, so he wondered who had let the chickens out into the garden. After some time, the captain of the knights congratulated the Duke and Shure on officially becoming a duchess. Shure thanked him and asked where he had been at the banquet. Jess replied that he was visiting his brother on the training ground. They spend more time in the main palace, and that's when they rarely see each other. In that case, Shure understood why the Duke also visited the parade ground. Anyway, she showed the flowers she had received. Jess was glad that his efforts had not been in vain. However, at this moment, our heroine was called to Betty and Annabelle. Without thinking twice, our heroine told the Duke that he should chat with someone for now. Reca, perplexed, asked if she wanted to let him in on something. The girl immediately changed the subject, starting to talk about how cool he looks. Maybe we should discuss this seriously. The Duke sighed heavily, then looked away and said that they had nothing to discuss. However, Annabelle and the others noticed at that moment that the maid arrived and brought a cake. The Duke asked in bewilderment if she had really prepared it. Our heroine grabbed his hand and said that she wanted to celebrate the wedding. Soon after, she approached him and said that she congratulated him on his marriage. The cake was beautiful and handmade. In the center of the jelly heart was a candle, as well as the names of the newlyweds. Reca asked if he could blow out the candles. The girl smiled and nodded. The Duke immediately said that this was their common holiday, so she should celebrate too. In that case, our heroine turned around and said that she would blow out the candles. At that moment, the girl noticed a flower that had wilted a little. It was a pity, but the day was still good. Shuer threw it into the air, and of course it hung there, but something strange also happened. All the people looked at this flower which blossomed in the blink of an eye. It was incredibly beautiful. They couldn't understand whether a flower had just blossomed in Shuer's hands. The faces of Irina and her father spoke for them at that moment. People whispered, realizing that they were being told that Irina had inherited Netri's power. But at that moment, the Duke asked Shuer if he could cut the cake. Our heroine smiled and said that he could cut off pieces, but not the heart. The girl explained that since it was a symbol of her love, the Duke had to cut the part where the heart ended. Reca sighed heavily and said that even just cutting the cake was already a task for him. However, at that moment the Duke was distracted by the clapping that was coming from the side. A man was addressing the lordship and congratulating him on his marriage. As it turned out, it was the crown prince who said that he was incredibly happy that he could congratulate them personally. But the strange thing is that at that very moment our heroine froze in surprise. But what was the reason for this? Taking a closer look at the crown prince, she noticed His Majesty's ribbon, which was very familiar to her. She immediately realized that this ribbon was exactly the same as the one that was tied on her bouquet that was given to her earlier. The girl understood that no one else in the room had such a ribbon, but it was the ribbon of the central region. At this moment, the prince approached the Duchess and asked if he could ask for her hand in greeting. She immediately remembered the words he had said yesterday on the terrace, and now the bouquet. If this was all a coincidence, it was a very awkward one. Anyway, the girl smiled and said that she had no hands. This answer undoubtedly took the prince by surprise. The room was completely silent after this answer. People could not understand what had just happened. Shuer asked if his lordship should do so first. It seemed that she had not greeted her. Reca said that it was not just a greeting. The girl said that she had a thing about greetings, so she was extremely picky about it. Anyway, the Duke took her hand and kissed it. He looked up at Shuer and said that this would be her first time with him. The girl said with admiring eyes that she would no longer wash her hands. At that moment, a voice came from behind them, amazed at how people expressed their affection in such a public place. The head of the Netri family said that His Highness Silcaro had shown politeness, so it was rude to respond to it like that. Smiling, the man said that this was the whole moral component of his daughter. Putting his hand on her shoulder, he said that no matter who she was married to, there were still plenty of problems with etiquette. Shuer knew she was a duchess, so she couldn't let it slide. The girl at that moment removed her father's hand and told the Duke that the people from Netri apparently lacked courtesy. The man asked in bewilderment if she really wanted to humiliate them. The girl apologized to the gentleman and said that she would send them a bouquet as an apology. Shuer turned to the maid and apologized for the request, but there was still a bouquet in her room that she would like to receive and leave this one there. Silcaro at this point was surprised to say that they had both flowers and cake. They probably had a good relationship. The Duke had won the last expedition, and the reason was probably the Duchess. Lord Netri said that if the Duke had already become engaged to Shuer, he was thinking of sending a detachment from Netri. He did not want future expeditions to be jeopardized. Our heroine thought that Irina would speak first, but why was she silent? Wasn't this what they had agreed on? The Duke was surprised, however. The man said he hadn't thought the center would be so concerned about northern affairs, and Silcaro replied that the duchy was still part of the Waker Empire. Reca, however, simply asked that the agreement not be forgotten. The prince replied that if the agreement was made by the previous generation, then they would inherit it and continue it. Placing his hand on the Duke's shoulder, the prince asked him not to be afraid to ask for help if he felt things were going hard. He would support him. Shuer noted that this sounded like concern, but in fact it was only an expression of imperial duty. Reca said that the North would cope with all forces. At this point, our heroine told the Duke that he must know that she liked him more than anyone else. The guy fell silent and soon said that it was unexpected. The girl at that moment suggested to try the cake and also that he should eat the part where her name was written. Reca asked in surprise why. Our heroine explained that she didn't want others to eat her name. He looked at the cake thoughtfully and asked again, "He should only eat her name?" The girl nodded her head, so the Duke immediately took off his glove and took a little cream on his finger. Having eaten our heroine's name, the Duke asked if he had taken enough. For some reason, Shua remained silent. The guy looked at her and noticed that right now she was rejoicing because she was happy. After some time, our heroine approached the noblewomen with a piece of pie and asked if they liked sweets. The girls thought for a moment and then said that they liked sweets. In that case, our heroine passed them the pie. Shua explained that ever since she arrived, she had wanted to ask someone what the best thing they had eaten in a long time was. The girls said that there was a bakery in the center owned by a former maid of the imperial palace. The Duke watched their conversation. Our heroine, noticing him, waved her hand at him, and the noblewoman told him that this bakery only works at certain times. Shua nevertheless said that she would go to his lordship for a couple of minutes and ask him to take her to this bakery sometime. Immediately after the girl went to the Duke, the noblewoman said in surprise that Shua was not at all as she had been described. Another girl noted that the Duke had changed too. Our heroine approached him and asked if he had called her Reca, shook his head. Shua said in surprise that he had been looking at her constantly. At that moment, a maid came to our heroine and brought the bouquet she had spoken about. Just looking at the bouquet, the Duke said that the ribbon looked like His Highness's ribbon. Shua said that she noticed it too, so she was going to return them. Reca said that he thought she liked flowers. As she was leaving, our heroine turned around and said that she only liked the ones he gave her. Soon, our heroine approached His Majesty asking for forgiveness for interrupting them. Shua handed the bouquet to the prince and said that she was giving him this bouquet as an apology as she had promised earlier. Our heroine smiled and said that this bouquet suited him better than her. She knew that it was not often that people used ribbon from their clothes to tie a bouquet. She also knew that Irina probably knew this ribbon. Duchess Annabelle mentioned that such ribbons were used at the imperial court as a sign of secret relationships. Irina immediately noticed the ribbon that was on the flowers as well as the ribbon that was on His Majesty. Turning her head, she told her sister that she had found the same ribbon quite quickly. Shua sighed in surprise and asked not to misunderstand her. She was only returning what was given to her. She thought it was just a coincidence that the ribbons were the same. The prince immediately began to say that it was he who sent the flowers, because if she was of the Netri clan, he thought that they would please her. This tape does not carry any subtext. However, at that moment, the Duke appeared behind Shua, reminding her that she was now Blain. The Duchess thought the flowers were from him, so she accepted them. Silcaro said that he understood that such misunderstandings were quite natural, but still. Then he stopped, deciding that even he himself could not explain everything. In any case, our heroine decided that the topic was exhausted, so holding out the flowers to the prince, she said that she would not accept flowers unless they were from the Duke. That's why she decided to return them and was glad that they found their rightful owner. The boy smiled and said that he knew that suspicion would fall on him no matter what he said, but he was not so stupid as to betray an old friend. Silcaro apologized to the Duchess and then said that he would take up the matter and find out who had tied the ribbon on the bouquet. Our heroine understood that she could not completely trust him, but she could not openly oppose him either. There was hope that the prince would become a link between the center and the north, but apparently someone else needs to be found. The action takes us back to Shua's room. She said that she thought the color was from the Duke, that's why she accepted them. Next time she had to be more careful. Anyway, she asked in surprise if the palace really did hide the sender of the flowers. It was true unless the sender deliberately said who the bouquet was from. Shua, however, suddenly wondered, what if the crown prince had told the truth, but who was behind it? There were too many suspects. Although this only shows how strong they are, if the North seemed weak, this would not have happened. Suddenly, the Duke came into the room and Shua was glad about it. Reca said that thanks to her, this banquet ended earlier. In any case, he asked the maid to leave the room first if she had already finished. Shua was incredibly happy that she would definitely put him to bed tonight. Reca asked in surprise what she had put in the cake. The girl cried out in bewilderment and asked what kind of nonsense he was talking about. She would never do that to him. The Duke said in a cold voice that he had not thought he would be pleased with such words. Our heroine, realizing that the Duke was about to undress, was delighted and in anticipation, but at that moment the man turned around and asked the girl to turn away. Shua asked in confusion if she couldn't even look. Reca asked her what she thought. The girl sighed and said that it was better to ask 1,000 times and hoped that at one point he would say yes. Our heroine began to hug the jacket the Duke had given her. It smelled of him and she was glad of it. At that moment, the man asked in surprise, or rather even reminded her, that she had promised him not to sniff his things. He immediately started to speak in surprise about the jacket and the fact that something had stuck to it. The Duke said he couldn't give her the jacket while they were in the capital. Once they got back north, he'd give her something. Our heroine smiled and said that she understood everything and did not want him to feel awkward. The guy said that it looked like a contradiction. One way or another, the girl said that she was worried that her conversation with the prince would ruin everything. Reca, however, said that things are better than ever now, so she doesn't have to worry. At this point, our heroine decided to say that the uniform suited her and almost fit her like a glove. The Duke said that even if it did, she couldn't wear it in the capital. Our heroine sighed and then climbed onto the bed, asking him if she understood correctly that he would be heading to the parade ground again tomorrow. After he nodded, Shur asked if she could go with him. The man said it would be early in the morning and that there was nothing in his jacket. She lay down on the bed and said that the capital was not bad, but they saw each other little. She needed a clear schedule of time spent with him, and there was very little of it. Shur asked if he was being bothered here. The Duke said that it wasn't exactly like that, since the Blain family didn't interfere in the political games of the center. Then the girl asked what the agreement with the center was that he had spoken about with the prince. The guy said that it stated that they would not interfere in each other's internal affairs. In that case, what will happen if the agreement is violated? If he interferes with the center's affairs, they will seize power over the expeditions, and Relda will be replaced by their own mage. In any case, he said that they didn't need the capital's power. Our heroine, by the way, understood that if she hadn't influenced his emotions, the Duke would have asked the center for help. However, she knew that she wanted Reca to kneel. The girl, closing her eyes, began to speak the conclusion to all this. Shur immediately said that she had been drinking tea at Duchess Annabelle's tea party, so why were her eyes seeing triple? The Duke said that she was delirious and advised her to go to bed. However, she said that if there were 3 of them, one would go to the parade ground, the second would work, and the last would stay next to her. In that case, she decided that all 3 would marry her. The guy waved his hand and told her to sleep. The girl still muttered something to herself, saying that she didn't have enough hands for the 3 of them, but there was still one Duke left. Where is he? Finally finding the Duke's hand, she grabbed it and said she had found it. Soon after, she fell asleep. The action takes us some time forward. The Duke could not leave the girl alone, so he spent time with her until she fell completely asleep. Soon after, he began to think the 3 founding families of the empire, Waker, Blain, and Netri, lived in harmony, until the imperial family began to control the other 2 families. The engagement with Arena support in the conquest of the north became an obvious support for this, but Silkero was the only one who spoke out against the actions of his kind. He remembered their conversation when the prince said that he was not going to break the treaty. They were the descendants of the predecessors, so they would inherit it all. Reca couldn't understand, did everything change after the engagement with one of the Netri? And by the way, he couldn't help but forget about the Shur incident. It was a very strange thing to give flowers with that very ribbon, but was it really he who gave it? He couldn't get it out of his head, but right now he was more interested in Shur's peace, so he continued to hold her hand. Thus the action takes us to the next morning. Jez came into the Duke's room and asked in bewilderment whether he had slept. The man said that he had only dozed off for a couple of minutes. Suddenly, he put the paper on the table and asked the captain of the knights to find a jeweler. The guy assumed that it was about the ceremony, or maybe he was looking for something specific. While dressing, the Duke said that he would like to find a ring with a carving or something special. Jez stood there in bewilderment and soon asked if he had misheard it. Why did the Duke need this? The man said that he had already spoken about a silver ring, for example, but something that stood out was needed. The guy asked the Duke what kind of strange tone he was using. However, not hearing an answer, the guy sighed and said that he would pretend that he had not noticed anything. At that moment, our heroine began to open her eyes little by little. A blurry silhouette of a man appeared in front of her. Soon her eyes opened fully, and she noticed the Duke standing and looking at her. She jumped up, saying that luck had been following her since the morning Reca asked why, in surprise to which the girl said that he had looked her straight in the eyes. The Duke said that it happened by chance, and our heroine happily said that, thanks to this, she had a feeling that the day would be wonderful. At that moment, the girl handed over the jacket, and the man said in surprise that he thought she would never take it off. The girl said that he would also have a chance to wear what she was wearing. Then she said that perhaps she should have sprayed herself with perfume, but Reca reminded her that in the north, demons can follow by scent, so she should be careful. However, the girl noticed that the Duke had not forbidden her to do this. In any case, having already gathered herself, she left her room. As soon as she came out, a man came up to her and said that she got ready quickly. The guy handed her a bouquet. Our heroine looked in bewilderment and saw that the Duke had brought her this bouquet, which made her incredibly happy. After that, they went about their business, and the girl asked if he could use the training ground as he wished. Like in the north, Reca nodded. He explained that Blain was here, so it was okay. He was the chief captain of the knights close to Arena, and he was Jess's brother. He was cute if he looked like his brother. At this point, Jess asked in confusion why she was asking the Duke about his brother Shure, replied that she liked listening to the Duke more than to him. The guy was perplexed by the words he heard, and the Duke was grateful that she liked his low and calm voice. The girl nevertheless told Jess that everything was fine. She told him that he would recover and get back into shape and would soon become a handsome man. The guy said that if she reduced the number of bouquets, then at least he would sleep more. One way or another, at that moment, the girl heard people around her discussing something heatedly. Our heroine asked the Duke if he knew what was going on here, but he said he had no idea. Shure knew that according to the story of the novel, nothing should happen now. In any case, the action takes us to the parade ground. As soon as our heroes entered, all the knights began to greet them. At this moment, Garros also came out and decided to greet his lordship personally. The man then greeted the Duchess and introduced himself. He had heard a lot about her, and it was an honor to finally meet her. Shure asked in surprise who had told him about her. The Duke! Garros replied that Jess had told him about her, but he had mostly complained. Our heroine looked away in embarrassment and said that she understood everything. Garros asked in bewilderment whether the Duchess would not scold him. Shure said that there was nothing wrong with him complaining about her. It would be a different matter if the Duke had complained about her, then there would have been a problem. Garros laughed and said that there were only 2 knights, so it was a bit difficult. How could they best arrange a meeting with the Duke? The girl immediately asked what place would be most suitable for this. Garros asked again in surprise. The boy scratched his chin and soon after asked what about the center of the training ground. After a while they moved there, and the Duchess was immediately brought a chair, although not the most comfortable, but that was all they found. The girl thanked them for their attention. Reca asked her why she had chosen such a place right in the middle of the training ground. She said that it was quite far from here since she could barely see his eyes, nose, and ears. The Duke said that if Jez hadn't stopped her, the sword would have already been in her hands. The girl replied that, to put it simply, beautiful things need to be looked at up close. One way or another, after some time, the Duke was already engaged in training nights. At this point, one of them turned to the Duchess and said that it was hard to imagine her with a sword in her hands, so there was nothing funny about it. Is everything okay? The girl asked in confusion what nothing funny meant. Her heart would jump out of her chest right now, she was so excited. Apparently, the reason for her excitement was the Duke, who looked graceful and luxurious. He has beautiful forearms. The guy asked in confusion what she was talking about. Shure looked at Sepik and said that he seemed to be the Duke's swordsman. Wasn't he watching him so closely? The boy thought for a moment and said that he was watching. The girl said that she also likes the Duke, so watching him is pure pleasure. In the north, for example, life depends on training and all because of monsters. There, the girl could not so freely watch their training, so she asked to understand her and allow her to be here. Sepik apologized and said that everything was fine. However, she noticed that the atmosphere was strange. Was there something wrong in the palace? The guy explained that an envoy from the palace had visited their parade ground, which was why there was such chaos. Our heroine, however, still could not understand what was wrong, because it seemed that there was nothing unusual considering that the parade ground was so close to the palace. The girl decided that she would need to find out what was going on here after the Duke finished training. Anyway, the guys continued to talk about something unclear, but Shure and Sepik laughed together. Watching this, the Duke couldn't concentrate. He couldn't understand how that guy could do it. What was he saying that made Shure laugh so much? However, at that moment, his opponent fell to the ground and screamed, which brought the Duke to his senses. The man asked if everything was okay, to which the knight replied that everything was so-so since he was unable to dodge. Anyway, at that very moment the Duchess came running to the Duke, asking in horror if he was okay. Reca explained that it wasn't him who was hurt. He couldn't control his strength. Our heroine looked at the guy and asked if he was badly hurt. The Duke said that knights, especially these ones, often get hurt. In any case, he said that if they were so easily wounded, then the North would soon come to an end. Sure, without further ado, ran to the chair and, picking up a bouquet of flowers, returned to the Duke. The girl approached the knights, but one of them asked the Duchess to step aside. Obviously, she did not listen to these words, but only took out one of the flowers from her bouquet. Soon after, she handed the newly healed flower to the knights and asked them to take it. The man looked at what was happening in bewilderment and said that he did not deserve to receive a flower from her. However, she said that she had not asked him to accept it. He should take it in his hand and hold it for a while. The knights immediately began to whisper. They did not understand what was so special about this flower. Reca, for example, said that the Duchess had never held a sword in her hands. Why would she give a flower to a wounded man? They assumed that Netri would raise a scandal and even began to try to find a secret connection. However, at that moment, the guy said in bewilderment that his pain had passed. Our heroine said that he seemed to have been trained well. He healed faster than any other normal person. The knight asked if she had done it. The girl smiled and said that she didn't even know. In any case, it was only a temporary solution, so it was worth going to a doctor and checking the hand. Soon after, the girl approached the Duke and asked if she was a good girl. He asked in surprise if she was really asking for a compliment. Shure began to nod her head, and after a heavy sigh, the Duke finally said that she was a good girl. At this point, the girl said she wanted to go get some desserts with the lady, so she asked him not to refuse. When she bought them, he had to eat. And again, the Duke sighed and said that he would definitely try them. The girl was incredibly happy. Meanwhile, the action brings us to the snowy mountain of the North. Relda was perplexed and said that he would soon go crazy. What kind of creature is capable of reviving after death? Anyway, all these wolves were even more obvious and worse than ordinary chickens, so he easily dealt with them with his magic. And yet, what riches and honor await him if he owns the Sur? He should have left this monster to rot in the North. However, at that moment, Relda noticed a stone at the place where the demon died, but it was probably not an ordinary stone. Soon after, a thought came into his head that only caused him to exclaim in bewilderment, as if he did not understand whether it was true. The action is again transferred to the capital. The ladies asked Shure if she had really bought all this just for the Duke. Our heroine said that it was so. She would be delighted if the Duke liked her purchases. The ladies laughed and then offered to have tea before she left. Shure agreed and then, turning to Tula, suggested that she take a rest and then they would see each other in 2 hours. The girl began to say that she was fine. However, our heroine insisted on it because she already works all day without a break so she can rest. Tula was surprised but decided to agree. All the ladies looking at the lady said that the more they were near her, the more it seemed to them that all the rumors were lies. They decided that someone was clearly exaggerating. Shure overheard their conversation, so she turned around and asked in surprise what rumors they were talking about. The girls said that when she is in a bad mood, she can tear Reca's clothes, stick needles into her. They, of course, do not believe it. Not some say that they saw everything personally. Our heroine laughed and said that among the Netri, she really is the one who doesn't know how to handle a sword, and she doesn't get along very well with Reca either. In any case, she said that a representative of the temple had arrived at the imperial palace in the morning. One of the ladies said that now she understood why father had arrived at the palace so early. Shure, nevertheless, asked in surprise who this representative of the temple was and what was going on in the palace. The lady replied to the Duchess that people were talking about finding a second magical recording stone. Our heroine was surprised to hear this. In any case, after some time, she returned home with her purchases and began greeting the Duke from the doorway. Reca looked at her in surprise and asked where she was going to put all the baked goods. The girl said that she bought it all for him. Also soon after this, she took out a box and asked his lordship to look at it. The man said in surprise that they were too big. Was he planning to wear them with a shirt? Our heroine told him in surprise that they were not for her. She saw how he looked in his shirt today. Just a work of art. So she decided to give him cufflinks and garters for his sleeves. Dark blue shades suit him, so she chose a navy blue. Instead of taking measurements, you can also do something else. She will make a mold according to the Duke's hand. After that, she would fill it with plaster so that the result would be a cast of his hand. Could that be done? Reca asked, puzzled if she really wanted to do that right now. The girl, without thinking twice, began to nod her head at the speed of light. Reca silently stood up from his chair and began to unbutton his sleeve. Our heroine was delighted. After all, she realized that the Duke would even give her his cufflinks. Nevertheless, he asked her in surprise what had come over her. She explained that she was just glad they could spend time like this. She wanted to take full advantage of it. Reca pointed out that there would always be enough time now. The girl smiled and said that she would take him at his word. However, she was thinking about the fact that the second magic stone was found earlier than the first if compared to the original. She also remembered that Irina's event would be earlier. At that moment, the Duke said in surprise that as far as he understood, she was not going to leave him. Schuer, perplexed, said that this would not happen, and probably he would not either. And she also hoped that he would use her gift. In any case, she said that she wanted to stay with the Duke as long as possible. By the way, she heard that there was a visitor from the temple today. It was about the recording stone. Did he know about it? Reca nodded and said that he had been informed of this in the morning. Our heroine asked if it was true that it concerned the stone. Reca replied that they were waiting for official statements. The girl was nevertheless upset and asked what if the news was bad and related to the Blain family. The man shook his head and told the girl that it was in the past, so there was no need to worry. By the way, if our heroine remembered correctly, the second stone was precisely related to the brutal massacre of the Blain family. The reaction of the knights on the training ground was also very telling. If the weakening north is announced on the stone, then everyone around will start encroaching on it. The girl decided that she needed to act as quickly as possible before anyone found out what was written on. At that moment, the Duke poked the girl with his finger and said that it was clear from her face how many things were bothering her, but there was no point in worrying. Reca assured her that he would not do anything to upset her. Our heroine did say that it would be nice to have 3 dukes, one in subjection to the Empire, one in control, and one more to her. After some time, the Duke arrived in the hall to Jaros, and Jesgeros said that he seemed to have a lot of news. Jess assumed that there were as many as accessories. The Duke, who appeared in all his glory, said that he had noticed this correctly. Jaros suddenly said that there are usually months-long queues for such jewelry. He also has a sharp look, so he suits these jewelry. Reca said that Schuer had put too much effort into this gift. Jess immediately assumed that something was wrong since she wasn't there. The guy said that she was tired. Jess asked if she was hurt, to which the Duke replied that she was not hurt, but his hand might be. Jaros at this point decided to ask the Duke if he had given the Duchess a gift in return. The man thought about it. The knight captain explained that she had tried, and even if he didn't like the gift, he should give her something in return. Reca scratched his chin. However, at that moment, one of the knights burst into the room asking the master if he was there. The guy shouted in bewilderment, saying that they had found another recording stone. People cried out in bewilderment, not believing what they were hearing. However, this stone was found in another place. Jaros turned to the gentleman and said that he should probably go. Reca nodded his head. Then another guy shouted, saying that they had found more than 10 stones already. They had to contact the priest immediately. These stones are said to contain divine secrets. It is believed that there are 5 stones, and that they are hidden all over the continent. Only 1 stone had been found before, and nothing was known about the others. Most people believed that if they were hidden, a catastrophe would be inevitable. However, the second Netri flower blossomed, and in such an unstable situation for the north, something happened. Stones were found that seemed to be waiting for their moment to appear, and at the same time no one knew their meaning. People were perplexed by what was happening. The stones were discovered at the same time. Some people even prayed, turning to the holy heavens. The priest ran up to one of the boys and asked where they found them. The boy replied that he had come across something big in the garden, looked, and at that moment another guy shouted, saying that he had found a magic stone. However, Irina shouted, introducing herself as the second commander-in-chief, asking all guests to remain calm and stay here. She also asked to follow their instructions and hoped for people's assistance. At this point, Jez turned to His Highness and asked if it was worthwhile to gather all the northern guests separately. The Duke, however, refused and asked not to interfere. They started saying that the number of stones found was more than 5, which meant they were probably not real. This could be someone's evil intent. Suddenly, the priest's foot stepped on the ground, asking who was causing the turmoil about the stones being discovered. It was not 1 or 2 people. Most likely anyone who has found or seen a stone dares to call it magical. It sounds like nonsense saying that Labail herself communicated with it in a dream. The man laughed, saying that there were too many imaginative people in the world, just like their friend Koa. One of them said that if Sebi Sir was fine, his mind was fine too. The fair-haired guy turned around and said that even his skin was irritated by his moralizing. It was probably because he woke up at night and was awake and then slept during the day. Soon, a commotion started, and people did not understand what was happening, but at the end, Sibi Melter, who was also the senior priest, said that he had only slept for 2 hours. However, people surrounded him and said that there was no way he would escape this time. Sebi was no doubt not happy about this. Soon the crown prince appeared, asking the priest not to rush. They hadn't seen each other for a long time. Immediately, the priest turned around and told the prince that he was as charming as ever. Silkero told him that only he could see the real stones among those discovered. They had to find out what they were, so they asked for help. Arena, at that moment, approached the priest and asked if he could prove the authenticity of the stones. Just by looking at one of the stones, Sebi said that both the stone itself and the font were just a blatant fake. All the people began to whisper in horror, saying that someone dared to counterfeit the holy stones. Who in their right mind would dare to do such a thing? By the way, someone was absent today. Arena immediately turned to the Duke and asked him if she could find out where Her Grace the Duchess was. He told her that earlier in the day she had complained of feeling unwell, so she said she would join them a little later. Arena, however, said that she had been fine yesterday. She explained that it was a state banquet for her ladyship and she was away, so they wanted to know what had happened to her. The Duke suddenly said that the banquet was in his honor. She didn't know that. Irina sighed heavily and said that it would be better for them to look at all the stones together. It was a matter of magic stones, and one of the Netri clan could not be excluded. However, the Duke looked at her with his condemning gaze and said that Shure was now of the Blain family. The girl instantly darkened. The Duke, in turn, only became convinced that the sisters' relationship was clearly not very good. However, he definitely decided that these were empty suspicions because Shure didn't care at all about his sister. On the very first day of arriving in the capital, Shure immediately became sad after a one-on-one conversation with Irina. At that moment, the man decided that he would deal with her himself, which he declared to everyone else. Soon the crown prince asked the Duke if he wanted to look at the stones. Without thinking twice, he agreed. In any case, he was surprised that this was the heritage of the family. They said that after losing all feelings, only the thirst for sword and blood remains. He still couldn't understand why this was happening. Couldn't the limit be higher? Anyway, the prince asked the Duke to look at them. So first, when Blain eats something sweet, his face becomes sullen. Netri's kindness is like the buzzing of a bee, it distracts. The next words were that those who see Blain's smile will know the meaning of the world, and peace will reign on all continents. Meanwhile, the action takes us to Shure, who was advised by Tula to go to the banquet because the people were too serious. Everyone knows that she is in her room. The maid also said that the knights asked about what Shure had done earlier. Our heroine asked the maid in surprise what she had said in response to this. Tula said that after sorting out her purchases, she began preparing for the banquet. Besides, the placement of the stones was awkward. How would she even get there? The girl definitely decided that they were all weird if they were watching the Duchess so closely. Tula decided to go and deal with him. Soon after this, the girl went out and closed the door behind her, and our heroine was left alone in the room. Shure at this point got up from her chair and for some unknown reason headed towards the bed. Did she want to sleep? Our heroine nevertheless pressed the lever and a secret door under the sofa opened. Shure mentally apologized to Tula. One way or another, the girl decided that the inscription about sweets and a sullen face was true. It was immediately clear that it was about the Duke. It's good that she did all this. Soon our heroine took out flowers and threw them into the passage. Using her magic, they began to stink. The stench was terrible. Cara flowers are great for getting rid of evidence, but they smell just disgusting. Then the girl sighed heavily, saying that she was tired. After she had carried the 12 recording stones, every cell in her body ached. Falling to the ground, she then exhaled with relief because now the aristocrats would be silent for a while. In the Empire, a country where the Waker clan, which unites Blain and Netri, represents power, the stones are proof of the divinity of the aforementioned clan's power. Moreover, not only forgery but also writing of various kinds of information about two families can greatly shake the empire. However, her head was simply bursting because it was incredibly difficult to write compliments, so she had no strength left at all, although she would write the name Reincarnated at least 100 times. Shure was glad that she knew the contents of the novel. She knew how to determine whether a stone was real or not. She knew the structure of the palace as well as the emergency exits. In the novel, when the monsters take over the palace after Raygrain's death, Silcaro and Irina assembled a raiding party and escaped through the back exits of the guest rooms. This information, however, was only given to them after the Duke died. She did not want to end up having to use it, however. Deciding to throw all the unnecessary things out of her head, she told herself that at least she hadn't been caught. That's why she liked the idea of the 3 dukes. Focusing on the capitals rather than the north and confusing the church should have an effect. She thought the Duke brought only good luck. At that moment, a puzzled voice was heard asking why she thought so. The girl immediately jumped up because she recognized the voice as the Duke's. However, the man immediately asked what the smell was. Suddenly, our heroine started talking about how her neck hurt for some reason. Could Raygrain take a look at it? The man looked at her in bewilderment and said that she had just been spinning around in bed like a squirrel in a wheel. Shure replied that she couldn't even attend the banquet, so she was sad and lonely. She pointed to her hand and said that it might be a rash. Can he see? However, despite the girl's empty words, the Duke decided to approach her. Up close, his face seemed even more refined, and his breathing quiet and unnoticeable. Raygrain asked in surprise what it was, and then said that the flower had blossomed with her powers. Our heroine said that everything was correct. Does the Duke like this flower? However, the man said that there was a strange mark left in place of the petal. Raygrain told the Duchess anyway that she was being asked to come down because of the situation with the stones. Many suspect her because of her absence from the banquet. Shure sighed and nodded her head. She knew that Irina might try to blame the North, but that wouldn't do. However, the girl immediately screamed and said that it was all her. It was she who forged the recording stones. Not at all surprised, he looked at her and asked why she had forged them. Shure was glad he wasn't surprised. In the novel, with the revelation of the second record stone, the North fell and the last heir of the North line was soon killed. She could not tell the Duke this. The girl said that many people have a strange idea about the North, about the Blain family. Soon the girl fell silent. The Duke told her that everything was fine and asked her to continue. Shure said that people thought the Blain family were crazy, enjoying cruelty and murder. Even if the Duke was emotionless, it was clearly unpleasant to hear that. The man immediately said that there was some truth in this. Such rumors are circulating in the capital. Shure asked in bewilderment how he could confirm this, because all this is just rumors. However, taking the Duchess's hand, the man said that this still could not be the reason for the counterfeit stones. The girl said that Annabelle had received an invitation from Netri. All the aristocrats of the capital region had gathered, and she simply wanted to distract their attention. In any case, she said it wasn't entirely in defense of the North. She even wrote specifically well of Netri. Raygrain sighed and said it definitely had an effect. However, the Duke looked at the girl and asked what she was thinking if she knew that someone could expose her. Shure was glad that he realized that it was in favor of the North. Raygrain explained to her that counterfeiting the stones was treason. Did she know that? Shure interrupted him and said that he was more important to her. The man still said that it was thoughtless. Our heroine asked him not to turn her over to the authorities, otherwise she would call him day and night. Raygrain asked in surprise if she really considered his words a threat. She said that if she passed out while repeating his name endlessly, the blame would fall solely on him, but no one would know anything if he remained silent. There was silence in the room. After an awkward pause, our heroine called out to him in surprise. She hoped he didn't want to rat her out. At that very moment, he flicked his finger on her forehead and said that she was talking nonsense again. He told her that she was now Blain, which meant that her affairs were now exactly the same as his affairs. Our heroine was incredibly happy to hear these words. The guy nevertheless said that he was glad that she understood it. Shure was still in the same shock but said she understood. Even for him, the unfeeling Duke knowledge meant something. In any case, he headed towards the exit and told her to get ready and he would wait for her outside. As soon as he left the room, he asked Jez what about his order. The guy said that there was nothing that could arouse suspicion towards the Duchess. Reca was glad to hear this but asked him to be prepared to double-check everything because the castle had many watchful eyes. Soon he was standing by the door waiting for Shure, puzzled by the fact that she had walked around the entire palace carrying such heavy stones. At that very moment, the girl opened the door and looked out of the door and said that she was ready. He immediately took her hand and said that it was time for them to go down to the banquet hall. After some time, Irina immediately approached the Duchess, telling her that according to rumors, she was late due to poor health. Shure said that she was not the center of attention. There were so many young ladies around that she felt sick. The girl suddenly asked her why she gave the knight a healing flower. Our heroine answered her that the speed of recovery differs from person to person. Unfortunately, she is not physically strong. In that case, Irina wanted to know what she had been doing during her vacation. Shure replied that she had been collecting gifts for the Duke. The girl asked again, and our heroine said that she was collecting what he would use when he went north, as well as food that he would eat, and Irina sighed heavily. Suddenly, the priest said that Shure brought a lot of accessories and food. The words of the accompanying ladies and merchants coincided. The girl asked how much she had bought of all sorts, and the guy answered that it was enough to occupy a separate storage room. Irina asked again. The priest said there were blankets, pillows, wooden swords, gloves, candles, cakes, knives, lots of stuff. Almost immediately, Irina turned around and thanked the Duchess for her help, saying that it was time for her to go. Our heroine was incredibly happy because even her sister could not ask more questions. The girl immediately grabbed the Duke's hand. As a result, they did not have the best relationship, so even a blind person would not notice Irina's bias towards her. However, at that moment, the voice of the senior priest was heard. He asked to find the one who had forged the recording stones and bring him to him. In the novel, by the way, it was mentioned that his appearance is more refined and sophisticated than a girl's, but he is really very handsome. His smile was as if he was happy. The priest understood that this man who had forged the stones knew a lot about the real stones, so he ordered that he be found as quickly as possible. Sebi Melter was the only one on the entire continent who received God's blessing. He became a priest for one simple reason. Even if you pretend to believe in God, you are already being fed bread. A convenient offer, isn't it? Perhaps it was because every day he prayed tirelessly to the Almighty for salvation from hunger. In turn, God heard and blessed him with the title of senior priest in a short time. At that moment, one of his subjects approached him and said that he should take a look at the stones. But first, he needed to determine the wedding date of the 15th princess of the Baccaran Empire. The boy did not understand what was stopping these aristocrats from deciding on their own wedding date. He asked Koa to tell the emperor to decide for himself. If he thinks of having another child, he will cut off the third leg that hangs from him. At that moment, Koa said in a quiet voice that the emperor had already given birth to his 20th child. Sebi jumped up and started shouting, saying that it was time to cut. Anyway, is that all? Why were there so many rumors about the recording stones? Because everyone was talking about the mountain being made of these stones, Sebi had no choice but to climb the mountain with the other priests. At the same time, he had to confirm or refute the authenticity of the stones, sort them out, and translate them. All this seemed to drive the senior priest crazy because he was tired of this monotony. However, something else happened. Once again, they said that several recording stones had been found on the castle grounds. Sebi shouted and said that they were all probably fakes, so he asked not to wake him up. However, this did not stop the priests, because after some time they were already dragging the senior priest on a stretcher. Soon as Sebi saw the stones, his train of thought immediately changed direction. The guy was perplexed and said that in front of him was the symbol of the god Raphael. When the recording stone absorbs the sacred power, the symbol of the god Raphael appears on it. This is the way to find the real recording stone. However, the problem was how much power had to be put into the stone. The guy knew that someone could lose their life creating something like that, so few people think about it. What was surprising was that the creator of this fake stone knew about the Raphael symbol and that the stone also emanated divine power, albeit weak. It's a little different from what he's used to, but it means there's someone alive who saw the Raphael symbol and engraved it on the stone. Sebi was incredibly happy about this. Finally, someone has come along who can replace him and do his job. Again, the action is transferred to the present. The prince asks in surprise, "Is there really someone who knows and has seen the recording stones? Why does the priest think so?" Sebi tucked his hair behind his ear and said he could not tell them more because of temple restrictions, but he felt it was better to postpone announcing the discovery of the second stone. Our heroine celebrated a small victory in her head because her plan worked, and the priest became interested. It was also surprising how different Sebi was from the novel. He was said to be very gentle and kind, but here he is, elated that he will soon be free. Our heroine approached the Duke and asked if they could trust the senior priest. Reca said that he might be strange, but he had never harmed anyone. Shur understood that forging stones could be an insult to the temple, but looking at the senior priest, she realized that he looked as if he was only too happy about it. The strange thing was that he also postponed the announcement of the second stone. Our heroine decided that she should talk to him, but at that moment a woman approached her and asked if everything was okay. The ladies said they had heard rumors that she was unwell. Shur told them that her whole body ached and that she had probably just been walking too much. The girls, however, said it was their fault because they had heard that it was difficult for her to walk often in the north. Shur still said that everything was fine, and she understood how important strength and endurance are. The noblewomen breathed a sigh of relief, saying they were glad to hear it, but still asked Lady Shur to take care of herself. The girl smiled and thanked them for their concern. And now finally the girls had disappeared. Now it was time to think about what to do with the priest. Wait. Where had the priest himself gone? At that moment, the man behind her whispered and asked if she was looking for him. The girl even jumped from such abruptness. Sebi said in bewilderment that he had bitten his tongue. Our heroine turned around in horror and began to apologize. Seeing the priest in front of her, the girl said that the gods would bless him and soon greeted him. Our heroine hoped that everything was okay with him, but she was no less interested in how to start the dialogue. Finally, thinking of what to say, the girl said that she wanted to check with him about the wedding. Would he be able to help? The guy said he now understood why she was staring at him like that. He apologized, but he had to follow the rules. He said that first comes the relationship, then the wedding. Before all that mutual consent is needed. Does she understand this? Our heroine, however, did not understand what he was talking about. Shur, perplexed, said that she already had consent. The guy asked when he had given it to her. The girl, even more perplexed, said that she was not talking about him, but about the Duke. Sebi sighed heavily and said that he did not even know why God had given him such a punishment. Shur then said that she would find a way to do without the engagement. The guy smiled and turned to her and said that she shouldn't depend on the church and wait for its approval. She can act on her own. After all, she needs to live her own life. Our heroine said in delight that it was immediately obvious that he was a real senior priest thinking everything through in advance. Can she really do as she wants? Sebi said that it was true, but Koa, who appeared behind him, said that it was not true at all. He asked him to stop using divine powers to make himself look better. Moving away from Sebi, the guy said that he was his assistant Koa. He wanted to know what was going on here. Sebi replied that another young lady had fallen in love with him. Our heroine nevertheless crossed her arms and said that she was already engaged, but Sebi replied that this also happens. The girl asked to listen to her. She likes the man with black hair and a piercing gaze, the one who is always next to her and the one who gives her flowers holding a sword in his hands. The senior priest laughed and said that she was a liar because, according to the description, it was not him at all. Koa replied that Sebi was known for his narcissism, so he asked for forgiveness. Sebi asked in surprise what was wrong, because the girl herself asked to marry her. At that moment, the Duke came up and asked in surprise what was going on here. The priest asked in confusion if this was the same piercing gaze. Koa bowed and congratulated Duke Blain on his engagement. Sebi, puzzled, asked what kind of engagement this was. The assistant told him that this banquet was in honor of the engagement of the Duke and Duchess. Koa apologized anyway and said he would contact them as soon as possible regarding the wedding date. He then asked her maiden name. Hearing that she was a Shuur Netri from the South Sebi, was surprised the younger Netri had asked for a wedding date, so he thought that the elder Netri had already begun preparing for her role as successor. However, at that moment, the knight who had sparred with the Duke on the training ground that morning approached our heroine. The guy smiled and said that he would get better tomorrow, and all thanks to the Duchess and her flowers. Shuur said she was glad he was not seriously injured. In turn, the knight apologized for his rudeness in the morning, and so he brought her flowers. Our heroine thanked him and also asked him not to be upset by the Duke's words. The guy smiled and said that everything was fine. The girl approached the Duke and said that everything had gone well. They would probably return to the capital, then let everything go peacefully. However, at that moment, Reca said that all this was only thanks to her. Soon, the action takes us to the evening when our heroes were in their room. As always, the Duke was working in the evening and Shuur couldn't sit still, so she looked in surprise, trying to understand what he was doing. The man asked her in surprise if it was time for bed. The girl said that she wanted to see him fall asleep first. He sees her sleeping every night and she wonders why he doesn't go to bed. Reca hit Shuur on the forehead with a piece of paper and asked if she still hadn't given up. At this point, the girl sighed and then asked the Duke to give her some daisies. Reca asked in surprise if she really liked them. The girl told him that she wanted him to give them to her because she had accepted flowers from another man right in front of him. It may have been a formality, but it could have hurt him. However, the Duke looked away and said that it did not bother him at all. Shuur, with even greater horror, said that this was already a problem. She knew that the Duke had looked like he was about to lose his temper when she was given the bouquet. Had she imagined it? Soon the girl asked him if he wanted to go for a walk, and the Duke immediately asked what the catch was. However, Shuur said that she only wanted him to sleep soundly. In any case, the action takes us to the next morning. Shuur looks as if she hasn't been in the fresh air for 100 years, although she simply hasn't gone out for 3 days due to fatigue. At this point, all the knights began to greet the Duchess. Shuur, of course, did not understand what was happening. However, the guys said that they had tried a little and prepared a chair for her so that she could watch comfortably. He asked her to try the chair quickly. Shuur said that the old chair was not bad, but they still did a good job. At that moment, the girl also noticed the Duke and greeted him. Approaching Shuur, he asked in surprise what had happened, and the girl suggested that he take a little rest. The knights had set up a tent with a chair, and there was much more space here. The Duke barely fit into the tent and said that it was probably just right for her. In any case, Shuur noticed how nice the Duke was. At that moment, screams began to be heard from the training ground. Our heroes raised their heads in surprise. They noticed Reincarnated Netri in front of them, who was told that she had won. All the people were amazed by the Netri clan's swordsmanship. They expected nothing less from their commander. For the first time, someone from the south became the commander of the Knight Corps. Shuur knew she hadn't achieved this by just pulling off some tricks. It probably had everything to do with being the main character. In any case, if Reincarnated defeats Jaros and becomes the new main commander, there will be no more people loyal to the Duke in the center. It feels like the North is being isolated. However, how did Reincarnated know that even the second child could use the sword's energy? This had never happened before, so this was what needed to be found out. At that moment, the girl began to walk towards the Duke, asking what he thought of her skills. Was she fit to be the commander of the Knight Corps? Shuur understood that these stupid questions would only harm the Duke. Reincarnated, noticing that there was no answer, decided that they did not like her skills. Our heroine immediately said that the Duke was probably tired, so she handed him a daisy. She handed it to Reincarnated in the same way. Then Shuur asked to return them because the Duke gave them to her. In any case, it seems that she needs restoration because she is not confident in her skills. Reincarnated, however, only said in surprise that the Duke probably didn't understand something. Shuur immediately asked for the daisy to be returned. The girl laughed and soon said that she would go because she still had a lot of work. She did not understand what her sister was bragging about. Anyway, Shuur said she didn't have enough flowers, so she asked for more. By the way, did he know that he blocked 65 attacks today? The man was surprised that she was counting and promised to give him more daisies. At that moment, the girl asked him to give her the flower back because she had to protect it because it was a gift. Our heroine knew that these daisies would be needed for something that would happen soon. The Duke returned the flower anyway. After a while, the girl asked why Jess was not sparring with the Duke today. The guy said that from now on he was obliged to accompany her grace. Shuer asked in bewilderment if this was really true. Even when they were in the capital, Jess answered that this was usually when troubles happened. At that very moment, our heroine screamed in bewilderment, and even Jess cried out. Nevertheless, the guy acted quickly and managed to grab the girl in time. A second later, already lying on the ground, Shuer asked what had just happened. Looking ahead, the girl noticed a horse in front of her, as well as riders who were rioting on the parade ground. All the people cried out in bewilderment, and the commander ordered the knights to capture the rebel alive. However, all that interested our heroine now was where the Duke was now. But the girl couldn't even think about it because just a moment later, another attempt on her and Jess's life happened. At that moment, a male voice was heard addressing Jess and asking him to close the girl's eyes. Without thinking twice, the boy carried out the Duke's order, and soon blood was flying in all directions. A moment later, the girl opened her eyes, and seeing chaos around her, she asked what happened. Jess answered her that it was the energy of his lordship's sword. At that moment, the Duke turned around and the girl could see his gaze. It was as empty and cold as the bottom of the ocean. She even realized in an instant that this was the same look he had when he captured the North. This is the curse of the Blain family. You lose your emotions and cannot judge clearly. There will come a time when he will not be able to distinguish good from evil. However, she decided that this would not do. If the Duke showed himself in such a way, then the North would be in danger. She immediately called Sepik. The girl told him to bring all the daisies from her bag because, looking at the Duke, she understood that she had to stop him. At that moment, Irina stood on the road at Shuer and told her sister to stop and not give in to emotions. The girl, perplexed, said that he ignored the rules and killed everyone, thus he violated the agreements with the North. Shuer ran past and said that they were alive. And again, she ran to the Duke asking him to come. She did not even pay attention to the barrier and jumped over it. However, at some point the girl realized that she could fall now, but Reca grabbed her and asked why she was acting so recklessly. Shuer raised her surprised eyes and turned to him. Holding a bouquet of daisies, she asked if he was wounded. Was he okay? The Duke replied that he was safe, and it seemed he had made her worry in vain. Just at that moment, Sepik came to our heroine bringing all the daisies. Suddenly, Irina asked if they heard her command. The rule of the North is not to interfere in the affairs of the capital, so she will immediately inform the Emperor about this. However, our heroine, looking at all the chaos, understood that this was different from the original. If it continued like this, the knights would not be able to fight and would die. Our heroine soon decided to show the result of how she had been collecting daisies for 3 whole days. The girl turned to the commander, Irina. The girl said that she agreed with everything she said, but first, she would like the senior priest to be called. At this time, the Duke again felt that familiar feeling, the emptiness in which he felt absolutely no feelings. Looking at his bloody sword, he asked himself only one question: why did he pull it out? Even though he looked at the world as if with a veil before his eyes, he still understood that there was something important. At that moment, Shuer's voice rang out, finally pulling him out of his thoughts. The guy saw her just as she was flying towards him through a huge rift. Seeing her sweet face, he only asked why she was so stupid. Why was she doing all this? Why was she risking herself? In any case, the Duke caught her and their dialogue followed, which we saw from Shuer's side. Anyway, the training ground was still in chaos. People were shouting for help everywhere. Approaching the commander of Irina, who was holding one of the victims, the guy said that these were all knights from the border regions. The poor guys mumbled incoherently about monsters. Irina glared at the Duke and said that it looked like someone wasn't keeping their border. Shuer understood that in the original, it was the knights who left the temple who were injured, but this time others were also injured because the priest allowed them to stay in the capital longer. However, at this point the Duke said that he didn't think there was a monster involved. Silcaro asked why he was so sure of that. Shuer explained that the wounds were too neat, while after a monster attack, there were ragged wounds. The prince asked if he was sure about that, to which the Duke nodded. At that moment, people began to whisper among themselves in bewilderment, and our heroine approached the Duke and said that she would distribute flowers to the wounded. Before he let her go, he asked her if she thought it was a monster. Shuer said it wasn't because the Duke had said it wasn't the work of a monster. Reca asked in surprise why she believed his words, to which the girl answered him that he said them. Soon after, our heroine went to the wounded knights and, holding out daisies, said that this should ease their pain. In the original, all the wounded were already dead, and the North took responsibility for what happened and found itself in complete isolation. However, it was necessary to confirm that this was not a monster attack. By the way, the power of the daisies was not enough, so it was necessary to wait for the priest. The girl went to another wounded man. Only when they got closer did the horse jump up again and start to howl. Jess immediately stood in front of Lady Schuer and protected her. The boy took control of the horse and then asked if he should put the wounded man down. The girl told him that the wound might open up so she would climb up to him. Jess was puzzled that it would take a century for her to climb up, so he said he would help her. At that very moment, he lifted the girl up like the legendary baby lion. However, it turned out that this was all he could do because she did not climb any further. Jez cleared his throat and offered to lower her back to the ground. After some time, the senior priest and his assistant arrived, and the two of them were very surprised at what they saw. Sebi said it looked horrific, so he asked how many were injured, including the young lady hanging in the air. Koa said 3 were killed, 27 were injured, and the lady was unharmed. With a heavy sigh, the boy said that it was time to begin, so at that very moment, all the wounded knights began to feel the priest's blessing. Sebi walked across the entire parade ground, leaving a healing trail behind him. All the knights immediately came to their senses. Our heroine looked at him with admiration and said that it was simply amazing. It wasn't for nothing that she carried the stones. Sebi stood up proudly and said that it was true she could continue praising him. The girl said that he was so powerful that his strength practically united the South and the North. The guy replied that it was obvious, so he wouldn't even consider it a compliment. Then Schuer said that she was ready to give him her entire fortune. The guy asked in surprise how much money she had in her possession, but in the end, she gave him a chamomile and left. Soon, the priest noticed that all the knights were holding these flowers. He asked Koa what they were holding, to which the assistant replied that they were all flowers. Sebi shouted in confusion and said that it was clear. Koa then said that it was daisies. The priest shouted even more, saying that he had not asked what kind of flower it was. Koa guessed that it was the same flower he had in his hand. Sebi sighed and said that he thought he was blind. By the way, where are the compliments on his beauty today? The guy also asked why he had never heard of the heiress of the Netri clan blooming daisies. Koa replied that as far as he knew, she bloomed not them, but Lantana. The boy asked this because the sacred power of the daisies was similar to the sacred power he felt from the stones. Looking at the 2 Netri ladies at the same time, the guy realized that 2 strong ladies had gathered in one family, which was interesting. The Duke asked the boys if they were sure it was a monster. They began to answer that they were not quite sure because everything happened too fast, but he thought it was a monster. Irina looked at them and asked if they remembered what he looked like. The guy said that he had red ruby eyes. He was huge like a castle. Schuer asked if such a monster really existed. The guy sighed and said that about 300 creatures fit this description. At this moment, Irina ordered punitive troops to be sent to the border immediately. The Duke, meanwhile, said that the scars were too neat. What did the monster attack with? The knight replied that they were attacked with claws as sharp as knives. Then he asked if the monster was alone, to which the boy nodded in surprise. At that moment, the Duke said that monsters usually moved in groups. If this monster had claws, then its intelligence had not reached the level where it could use weapons. He had never heard of such a monster before. The knight began to panic and prove that it was definitely a monster. He asked to believe him. Reca asked what kind of monster it was that a completely inexperienced knight could escape from. The guy asked if that was a problem. The Duke looked at the poor fellow with her piercing gaze and said that it all sounded as if defending the North would be a piece of cake. The guy got very tense, and Irina at that moment said that everything would be clear when they got there. Perhaps the monster left traces behind. Our heroine just hoped that they would leave. She didn't think that ordinary knights would sing a song about seeing a monster. It was unlikely that anyone would be found in those places. In any case, punitive troops set out to investigate the scene. Sebi, watching them go, said that this was just ridiculous. If these guys had been wounded by monsters, the sacred power would not have saved them. At that very moment, all the people who remained there in bewilderment turned their gaze to the priest. Sebi said that the monsters had a power opposite to the sacred one, but the attacker's power was more similar than opposite. Silcaro immediately turned around and asked Tepper in confusion what was going on here. He was waiting for an explanation. The guy tried to say something else, but he understood that he was in a complete trap, so there was nothing else left to do. At that very moment, the knight grabbed Shure and ordered everyone to stand in their places, otherwise he would do something they did not want to see. The guys tried to do something, but Tepper continued to hold the Duchess hostage. The prince tried to have a peaceful dialogue with him. Sebi, confused, asked what was going on. Koa suggested that Shure was now apparently a hostage. Sebi, confused, said that he had figured it out without him. The priest shouted and said that if he healed the Duchess if she was hurt, this guy was not a monster. Shure sighed, thinking that at least something calmed her down.